Chapter 89. After eating, Yen held onto the railing and went upstairs. The dishes were naturally delicious, but she ate until there was not a single grain of rice left. Even if it was a delicacy, it was still difficult to swallow in the end. She finally finished eating and got the right to eat tomorrow, but she still had to be glanced at by second young Master Xiao, who lightly mocked her by saying, "Sure enough, you're generous." If he didn't say that she shouldn't waste food, how could she be a rice bucket in front of so many people? The other diners looked at her strangely. Yen felt embarrassed. She was too full and really didn't want to talk to Xiao Ju, so she followed the waiter upstairs. Fei Nu didn't follow, but she was too lazy to care. As soon as she entered the room, she lay down on the couch. She was really full to the point that she couldn't walk. His body felt soft and comfortable. Yen couldn't help but roll around on the bed. So it was good to have money. Even when he went out, he could enjoy it so much. Xiao Ju's room was next door. She leaned against the wall and pricked up her ears, wanting to hear what Xiao Ju was doing. She didn't know if it was because the wall was too thick, but she couldn't hear anything. As she listened, Yen fell asleep. She had rushed for half a day today, and when she came back, she was full and the bed was so comfortable. It was hard not to fall asleep. When Yen woke up, the sun had completely set and the moon was out. She opened the window and saw that the lanterns downstairs were already lit. Not far away, there was the sound of singing in a restaurant. Yen rubbed her eyes, drank a cup of water, got up and opened the door. She walked to Xiao Ju's room and knocked on the door. After a while, someone in the room said, "Come in." Yen walked in. The room was lit, and Fei Nu was guarding the door. Xiao Ju was sitting at the table, reading a book. Didn't this person feel sleepy? She didn't see him working so hard at Xiancheng restaurant, but now he was working hard. Yen's heart was filled with shame. Look, this is what it means to have endless learning. She craned her neck to see what Xiao Ju was reading, but Xiao Ju closed the book and she couldn't see anything. He looked up with a cold gaze. "What's the matter?" Yen asked, "Commander-in-Chief, what do you do at night?" "Nothing." "Are you not going out?" He said, "What do you want to say?" Yen smiled and said, "If you don't have anything else to do, I want to go out for a walk. It's also my first time in Liangzhou City. I want to see if there are any interesting things around." She made up a story. "If I find something suitable, I'll buy some and bring it back for my fiancé." Xiao Ju didn't seem to be interested in her affairs. She said indifferently, "Up to you." Yen was overjoyed and said, "That's great, Commander-in-Chief, I'll leave first." She practically skipped down the stairs. After she left, Xiao Ju said, "Fei Nu, the imperial bodyguard already knew and said, 'Young master, I'll follow him. Don't follow too close.' He said, 'Be careful not to be discovered.' This subordinate understands." Yen excitedly left the room. Yuan Baozhen hadn't arrived in Liangzhou yet. For the next few days, they would be staying in an inn. They didn't tell the county magistrate that they were coming early. Other than repairing the zither, Xiao Ju probably had other things to do. Yen didn't plan to follow him. At least for now, Xiao Ju didn't seem to trust her at all. There was no need for her to warm up to him. She also didn't want to stay in an inn and read books like Xiao Ju. It would remind her of the terrible memories she had when she was studying at the Xiancheng school. The night was perfect, so she took advantage of this time to walk around. Although Yuan Baozhen hadn't arrived in Liangzhou yet, if he wanted to know about the He family, there were other ways. Wherever there was a tavern or a tea house, as long as he shouted, "I know that recently General Fei Hong," it would lead to countless topics. She wasn't boasting, but during the years when she was most famous, many storytellers would tell stories about General Fei Hong every day. Of course, they would also tell stories about General Fengyun. At night in Liangzhou, there weren't as many people on the streets as in Shua, but it wasn't deserted. The street vendors also sold local products. He Yen walked and looked around. She only had 1 ingot of silver that she received from the flag fight. Although Xiao Ju was her uncle, he didn't have any intention of giving her money to spend. Fortunately, He Yen had already eaten and drunk enough. He didn't want to spend money, so he just looked around and didn't buy anything. About 10 steps behind her, Fei Nu was following closely. Xiao Ju suspected that He Yan's identity was different. This time, he brought her to Liangzhou to keep an eye on her and see if she secretly contacted people from Sujingfu. Fei Nu followed him diligently, but in the end, he was still a little puzzled. This young man looked around as he walked, as if he had never been out shopping before. It was extremely novel. He said that he wanted to buy some trinkets for his fiancée, but he didn't buy a single one even though he looked around. Either he was a stingy person and couldn't even bear to give a box of cosmetics to a girl. Or he was lying and was just trying to cover it up. He Yen turned around a street and walked into an alley. Fei Nu remembered Xiao Ju's words and didn't dare to follow too closely. When he estimated that He Yen was about to reach the end of the alley, he turned into the alley. As soon as he entered, he was stunned. The alley was empty, and there were only a few hanging lanterns floating in the wind. There was no one in sight. Fei Nu cursed in his heart and quickly walked to the end of the alley. There was a big road at the end of the alley, and there were crowds of people on both sides. He didn't see the young man. He was discovered. He clenched his fists. Not only that, but he also lost him. He Yen flicked his sleeves and walked forward without saying a word. Liangzhou city didn't look very peaceful, and there were many bandits and thieves. She had just arrived and hadn't familiarized herself with the place yet, but someone was already following her. The other party had been following her all the way. She thought that she hadn't offended anyone yet, so they probably wanted to take advantage of her. However, she was still keeping an eye on Cheng Lisu's identity, and Xiao Ju was still at the inn. It was better not to cause trouble. Therefore, she didn't make a move. She didn't even meet the other party face to face. She just quietly got rid of the person behind her. Without a tail, it was easier to walk around. However, searching like this wasn't a solution. He Yen stopped a passerby on the street and smiled. "Brother, do you know where the largest restaurant in the city is?" That person looked at He Yen from head to toe. Seeing that He Yen was dressed luxuriously and had an extraordinary appearance, he guessed that He Yen was the young master of some rich family. His tone was especially good as he said, "The biggest tavern is the 10,000 Flowers Pavilion." "Thank you," He Yen asked again, "may I ask how to get to Wanhua Pavilion?" "It's not far. Follow this street and walk until you reach the end. You'll see a rice shop. Turn left and you'll see it not far away." "Thank you, brother." He Yen cupped his hands again and then walked forward with a smile on his face. It was exactly as that person had said. Indeed, it didn't take long. If you walked along the left side of the rice shop, you could hear the sound of a pipa. There were many young masters dressed in luxurious clothing walking in that direction. Needless to say, it was Wanhua Pavilion. He Yen followed the crowd and walked inside. Before he reached the entrance, he could smell a fragrant wind. He Yen paused and felt that it was a little strange. At this time, a red fragrant wind blew in front of him. A snow-white arm wrapped around his shoulder and the woman's charming smile was a little flirtatious. "Young master, you're new. Is this your first time in our Wanhua Pavilion?" He Yen, wasn't she asking about the largest restaurant? Could anyone tell her why the Wanhua Pavilion that person mentioned was actually a brothel? He Yen said, "I'm not here." She tried to push the girl's hand away. However, when the girl heard this, not only did she not get angry, she even pressed closer. He Yan's arm touched a ball of softness and he immediately felt embarrassed. Even though they were both girls, this was too intimate. The girl in red hugged He Yen and walked inside. As they walked, she said, "If you're not here, you can come in and take a look." Our Wanhua pavilion is very fun. The other party was a girl and he couldn't deal with her the same way he dealt with Wang Jiugui. He Yan had no choice but to say, "Miss, I don't have any money. I'm very poor." The girl glanced at his clothes from head to toe and chuckled, "Young master really knows how to joke. You can't be so stingy. If you're really stingy, it's fine. Yun Yan will treat young master to a drink today and won't accept any money. How about it?" He Yan was dizzy from the strong fragrance of the incense on her body. He wasn't paying attention and was pulled into Wanhua Pavilion by this girl called Yun Yan. As soon as he entered, he felt a warm and fragrant wind blow against his face. On the stage, there was a young girl in thin clothes playing the zither and singing. A group of young masters sat below the stage and cheered, throwing couplets and indulging in a life of luxury. There were people everywhere. He Yan hadn't seen such a scene in a long time. He stopped in his tracks and didn't know where to go. Seeing this, Yun Yan covered her mouth and giggled. She pulled He Yan's arm again. "Young master, let's go upstairs. There are too many people here. Young master is so handsome, I'm afraid someone will come and snatch you." After saying this, she touched He Yan's face. He Yan felt a chill run down his spine, like a rabbit entering a wolf's den. He felt uncomfortable all over. However, Yun Yan was a passionate person. She didn't care about He Yan's expression and pulled He Yan upstairs. Wanhua Pavilion had several floors. The lowest floor was a long stage where the girls of the brothel played and sang. Further up were the elegant rooms, which required even more silver. They were used to entertain important guests. Further up were the rooms where the girls lived. In Wanhua Pavilion, Yun Yan's appearance wasn't outstanding and there weren't many guests who came to take care of her. Today, she finally managed to catch a rich young master like He Yan at the door. How could she let him go so easily? He Yan had delicate features. If this kind of person was seen by other girls, they would inevitably try to snatch him away. There were too many monks and too little gruel. Of course, she had to take the initiative and lock him in her room. She kept pulling He Yan's arm and refused to let go. He Yan pondered how to get away naturally. When he reached the second floor, he didn't see the guest hugging the girl. "There's no one upstairs?" He Yan asked. Yun Yan laughed. "Not everyone can enter a girl's room. Young master, don't take advantage of her." The girls here were fierce and bold. He Yan didn't know how to deal with them. When he passed by a room, the door suddenly opened and a person with disheveled hair rushed out. She had just reached the door when someone grabbed her hair and dragged her back. He Yan didn't have time to take a closer look before the door was slammed shut. It almost hit her nose and knocked her fan out of her hand. Everything happened too quickly. He Yan was stunned for a moment. Yun Yan hurried forward and asked, "Young master, are you all right? Did I hurt you just now?" He Yan shook his head and bent down to pick up the fan. He then turned his head to look at the closed door. Her hearing was excellent. She could faintly hear a woman crying from inside, followed by the sound of a servant scolding someone. "Here." He Yan reached out to push the door. "Young master, you can't." Yun Yan stopped him. "What are you doing?" Her gaze was guarded. He Yan's heart skipped a beat. When he looked up again, his eyes were full of curiosity. Who's inside? What were they doing just now? After all, it was her first time in a brothel. She didn't know anything. Yun Yan's heart flashed with a trace of contempt. She smiled and took He Yan's arm again. "It's our new girl. She doesn't know the rules and offended a guest. The servant is teaching her. There are girls in your brothel who don't know the rules." He Yan said calmly, "I thought they were all as understanding as you." Yun Yan's face lit up with joy. She rebuked, "Young master has such a sweet mouth. We grew up in a brothel. If we don't know the rules, we won't eat. Naturally, we don't dare to offend guests. But some people are different. They have never suffered before. When faced with a sudden change, they think they are still the young ladies of the past. They are arrogant and willful. They will always suffer. After a few times, they will understand. He Yen raised his eyebrows. So you are from a good family. Young master, Yun Yen pretended to be angry. She lightly punched He Yan's chest and said, "Are you saying that you don't like the girls in our brothel?" He Yen chuckled, "How can that be? Compared to a wild cat with claws, of course a well-behaved girl is more lovable. She was born delicate and pretty. Wearing Cheng Li's clothes, she looked like an elegant young man. If she deliberately pretended to be elegant, she could charm a large number of young women." Sure enough, Yun Yen was dazzled by her smile. Unconsciously, she became more talkative. Even so, there are some people who like this wild cat with a temper. Don't look at how the people in this room don't know the rules. Now, the young master of our Liangzhou's county magistrate wants her. I don't know where this luck came from. At this point, there was a hint of jealousy in her voice. The young master of the county magistrate? He Yan's heart was in turmoil. His expression did not reveal any flaws. He looked at her in surprise. The people in this room are so beautiful that even the young master of the county magistrate came here because of her reputation. What do you mean by that? Yun Yan did not think much of it. When this girl first came to our pavilion, mother wanted her to receive a guest. The guest was young Master Sunday. Who knew that she would be so fierce? Not only did she not serve young Master Sun, she even used a hairpin to stab young Master Sun's arm. Young Master Sun is the county magistrate's only son. How can we just let it go like this? Let mother train this girl for a few days. When she is obedient, we will send her to him. As Yun Yan walked forward, she said, "But this girl has a backbone. It has been 3 days, but she was still like this just now. It has been a long time since we have seen such an unyielding girl in our Wanhua pavilion. What should we do?" He Yan waved his fan and said worriedly, "If she is not trained well, how will you explain to young Master Sun?" Young Master is joking. There are no girls in Wanhua pavilion that cannot be trained. No matter how unyielding a girl is, if she is drugged, she will not be able to do anything. I think this girl is asking for trouble. If she was obedient and coaxed young Master Sun, she might even be able to become a concubine. But now, even if she is on young Master Sun's bed, she will not be able to win his favor. Who knows how miserable her fate will be? As she said this, she felt jealous and somewhat sympathetic. Maybe she will think it through in a few days. He Yan comforted, "Don't worry too much." Yun Yan shook her head, "I am afraid there is no time. Soon, young Master Sun's people will come to pick her up. Just now, I was putting on makeup." He Yan did not say anything. Yun Yan seemed to have realized that she had said too much. She showed her initial charming smile and pulled He Yan to a room at the end of the hall. She pushed He Yan in and said, "Look, how can we talk about other people's affairs? Young master, why don't we talk about us?" This was a woman's boudoir. It was not very big. There was some rouge and face powder on the dressing table, and the hibiscus curtain was red. She suddenly felt that the night of spring was too short. She put her hands around He Yan's neck again. He Yan's scalp was numb, but he still maintained the attitude of a romantic young master. He smiled and said, "It is good to have a beauty in my arms, but don't you feel that something is missing?" Yun Yan asked, "What is it?" "Of course it is wine. I feel like old friends with you at first sight. In this situation, we should drink a cup together." She thought about the scene of He Yuangliang playing with the concubines in the Fu and tapped Yun Yan's nose. "Didn't you want to treat this young master to wine? Are you lying to me?" A romantic and handsome young man was flirting with her. Even a woman of pleasure could not help but feel her heart flutter. Yun Yan stomped her foot and said, "Why would I? Wait here, I will go get the wine now. Tonight, we will drink until we are drunk." She gave him a flirtatious look and walked out the door. After she left, He Yen sat down on the chair and let out a sigh of relief. Imitating men in the brothel, whether it was in the past or now, was not something she was good at. It was really killing her. It was even more frightening than going to the Xiancheng school to study. She flicked her sleeve again, and a small ball of paper rolled out from her sleeve. Just now, when they passed by the room, someone suddenly rushed out and was caught. In that extremely short period of time, a ball of paper was thrown out. At that time, she was afraid that Yun Yen would find out, so she threw her fan down and covered the ball of paper. When she bent down to pick up the fan, she also picked up the ball of paper. She was afraid that Yun Yen would find out, so she did not dare to take it out until now. The ball of paper was crumpled and scattered. He Yen opened it and saw 2 words written on it. Save me. The handwriting was written with eyebrows and was a little blurry. The person who wrote it must be very nervous. Even so, he could see that the hairpin small regular script was very beautiful. There was a girl locked up in that room. Although Yun Yen said it in a dignified manner, in the end, it was nothing more than forcing a good girl into prostitution. Now that she was by Xiao Ju's side, she should not care about these things to avoid trouble. But since she found out about this, she had a lot of resentment in her heart and could not stand by and do nothing. He Yen put away the ball of paper, stood up, and left. When Yun Yen came back with the wine, the room was already empty. She was stunned for a while, then stomped her foot and scolded, "Liar." The night gradually deepened. The singing in the Wanhua pavilion became more and more flirtatious. Men and women huddled together, talking and laughing intimately. It was hard to tell if they were just putting on a show or if they were sincere. The moon here was not as clear as in the city. Probably because there were no mountains or rivers, it was less spacious and more blurred. In the tea house opposite the Wanhua pavilion, a young man in brocade clothes was sitting and drinking tea. In the end, He Yen could not bear to use the silver ingot. So, he took a button from Chen Li Su's clothes. The button was inlaid with gold. He Yen used this button to buy a cup of tea, the cheapest kind. The owner of the tea house had probably never seen such a weirdo who was dressed in luxurious clothes but had to pull off the buttons to pay. He looked at her with a somewhat indescribable gaze and only said, "Little brother, you should keep the buttons for yourself. This cup of tea is for you to drink. It's free." He Yen. "Thank you very much." She slowly put the button back into her pocket, thinking that she would sew it back on for Chengli after a while. Why later? Naturally, it was because she had to go out in the next few days. What if she wanted to drink tea again? She did not want to have to pull it off a second time. If Chen Li Su knew that He Yen had such thoughts, she would probably regret lending her clothes. As the night deepened, the Wanhua pavilion became more lively. More and more guests came to the pavilion, and very few people went home. With a warm and fragrant woman in his arms, he naturally did not want to go home. At this time, someone came out of the Wanhua pavilion and saw very clearly. A carriage stopped in front of the Wanhua pavilion. 2 fat nannies helped a woman out. Half of the woman's body was leaning on one of the nannies, and she seemed to be drunk. He Yen took a closer look. Instead of saying that the 2 nannies were helping her out, it was more accurate to say that they were holding her up. This was probably the strong-willed girl that Yun Yen mentioned that the young master had taken a fancy to. The strong-willed girl was put into the carriage, and the carriage took her away. In addition to the coachman, there were 2 people who looked like bodyguards following beside him. They looked like escorts. He Yen spat in her heart. They were really treating people like goods. She put down the teacup in her hand and quietly followed them. There were not many lanterns on the streets in Liangzhou City, so the night was especially dark. He Yen felt that the carriage almost merged with the night. The 2 guards sat on the ruts of the carriage and talked. "She's much more obedient today. She didn't even make a sound. Do you think she will have a good time after entering the Wanhua pavilion? This girl is too ignorant." If she had been obedient earlier, she wouldn't have had to suffer all this torture. Didn't she say that she's a young lady from a rich family? It's normal for her to take things too hard. But this is good. The young master doesn't like her. After tonight, perhaps you and I will benefit. The two guards looked at each other and laughed obscenely. Just as they were talking, the carriage suddenly tilted forward, and the two of them almost fell off. One of them scolded, "Hey! What's going on?" They looked up. He saw a person sitting under the low eaves of the house. He was wearing a brocade robe with his hair tied up. Half of his face was covered with a handkerchief, and only a pair of eyes could be seen. He seemed to be smiling, but because of the darkness, they could not see clearly. He was tossing a few pieces of shirtu in his hand. The carriage stopped because a piece of shirtu had scratched the wheel, and the carriage could not move. "Who are you?" The guard got off the carriage and shouted. "Is there something wrong with your head?" The man spoke in a low voice, but it could not hide the arrogance in his words. He pointed at himself and said, "I'm dressed like this. Of course, I'm robbing." "Robbing? In broad daylight?" "No, it was a dark and windy night." But in Liangzhou City, this word had not been heard for a long time. More importantly, there was someone in Liangzhou City who dared to rob them. "I think you're tired of living." The guard sneered. "Do you know who we are?" "Yes," the man said lazily, "Magistrate's son, a member of the Sun family." "If you know, how dare you?" "Yes, I dare." His words were interrupted by someone. The next moment, he saw that person rush down from the eaves and rush over. It was late at night, and there was no one on the road. The coachman was so scared that he had abandoned the carriage and ran away. The two guards did not stop there. In an instant, the three of them were entangled in a fight. The noise outside seemed to have alarmed the person in the carriage. There was also a rustling sound in the carriage, and the person inside seemed to want to come out. He Yen shouted, "Stay inside and don't move." Suddenly, the sound disappeared, and the person stopped moving. One of the guards seemed to have realized something. "You're her lover." "Well, you said you were robbing. So you're in cahoots. Is the Sun family's brain made of paste?" He Yen exclaimed and punched the guard in the face. The guard fell to the ground and could not get up for a long time. The other guard rushed over with a knife. Unfortunately, his strength was enough to defeat ordinary people, but it was not enough in front of He Yen. He Yen smiled and grabbed the guard's wrist. The guard only had time to scream and the knife in his hand fell. He Yen kicked him a few meters away. Although these two guards were the little young master's guards, He Yen did not feel that they were good at fighting. They probably just came out to pick someone up and sent two guards. Who would have thought that in the Sun family's territory, there would be someone so daring and fearless to intercept? She bent down and picked up the knife that had just fallen on the ground. The two guards were beaten up and had no strength to fight back. Seeing the masked man approaching step by step, they subconsciously retreated. One of them said, "Let's talk nicely. Don't be impulsive." "Hero." This was one who spoke softly. There was another person who didn't show any fear, but it was unknown if he was just putting on a strong front but cowardly inside. He looked at He Yen and sneered, "Stinky brat, you've got guts, daring to touch the Sun family's people. You have to know that if you intercept someone tonight, it will be your turn tomorrow. You're in big trouble." He Yen did not look at them and approached step by step. When the two of them were pale, she cut the rope that connected the carriage to the horse. "I'm afraid." After that, she directly stretched out her hand and pulled the person out of the carriage. The woman was drugged and could not move at all. She stared at He Yen with her eyes wide open. He Yen helped her get on the horse and followed her. He raised the whip and quickly disappeared into the night. Chapter 90. The horse galloped in the silent night. After an unknown amount of time, He Yen pulled on the reins and stopped the horse. This place was an empty market. The peddlers had already returned home. This strong-willed girl had been trembling since she got on the carriage. Now that the drug had worn off a little, she could speak again. Her voice was soft and weak as she said, "Let go of me." He Yen helped her off the horse and sat down in front of a tofu shop. Just now, he was in a hurry and didn't take a good look at this girl's appearance. Now, with the weak light of the lanterns hanging under the eaves of the tofu shop, he could see that this girl was indeed beautiful. She was delicate and soft, white and tender, with delicate eyebrows. Her cheeks were a little chubby and she looked a little childish. She shouldn't be too old, at most about the same age as Qingli Su. She was such a young girl, but she was dressed like a demon by the people of Wanhua Pavilion. She wore an inappropriate thin gauze dress and heavy makeup. She was so cold that she was shivering. As soon as he sat down, the girl shrank back and looked at He Yen with vigilance. "Who are you?" He Yen was stunned for a moment. When he came back to his senses, he thought that this girl must have thought that he was a flower thief. He took off his scarf and said with a smile, "Don't be afraid. I'm someone who came to save you. It's just that it wasn't convenient for me to show my face, so I used a scarf to cover my face." "I didn't scare you, did I?" Under the moonlight, the young man who took off his scarf had delicate eyebrows. His soft voice made people gradually let down their guard. "How did you know?" She was still struggling to speak. He Yen took out a ball of paper from his sleeve. "The one you threw out, I picked it up. I heard that Wanhua Pavilion forced girls into prostitution, so I hid it in the tea house next to Wanhua Pavilion. I followed the carriage that took you away." He Yen looked at the girl. "Are you okay? They didn't hurt you, right?" It would have been better if he didn't say this. As soon as he said this, the girl's eyes turned red. She trembled as she reached out her hand. Her 10 fingers were shockingly swollen. She didn't know what had pinched her. The girls in the brothel, especially the newcomers, even if they didn't know the rules, they should be taught a lesson. Their mother wouldn't use methods that would leave marks on their bodies. After all, the girls still had to go out to entertain guests. If she had bruises on her body, the guests' appetite, the loss would not be worth it. Therefore, she came up with this method of torture. He Yen felt a bit of heartache. Whose family's daughter was ruined like this? Her parents' hearts were about to break. She softened her voice and asked, "Miss, where is your home?" "I'll send you home first." "Home?" The girl was stunned for a moment and looked at He Yen. After a while, she answered, "My home is in Shuajing. And. Bye." The little girl said, I escaped from my marriage. Originally, I wanted to go to Yangzhou, but halfway through, I got the wrong direction and came to Liangzhou. Originally, I only wanted to stay in Liangzhou for a few days, but I didn't expect to be seen by Sun Ling," she hatefully said. "If I return to the capital, I will definitely teach them a lesson." He Yen. This little girl looked weak and delicate, but her guts were too big. She dared to run from Shua to Liangzhou. What's wrong? Is it the trend in the capital to run away from marriage? Qingli was like this, and now this girl was also like this. He Yen said, "Did you come alone? Do you know anyone in Liangzhou? Do you have a place to stay?" The girl shook her head. He Yen was also in a difficult situation. She was so big, could it be that he had to bring her back to the inn? Xiaoju wouldn't beat him to death, would she? Although in a few days, they were going to County Magistrate Sun's mansion for a banquet. Although she had just kidnapped someone from County Magistrate Sun's son. The girl seemed to see He Yan's difficulty and sat up with difficulty. She bit her lip and said, You don't have to worry about me. I will hide myself. Your great kindness, when I return to Shuajing, I will let my parents repay you. What do you want? Gold, silver, jewels, beautiful women. What's your name? When I go back, I will. Little girl, you can't even protect yourself now. He Yen held his forehead. It's hard to say if you can even walk out of Liangzhou. Don't talk about something so far away. So what? The girl avoided his gaze and said with red eyes. I won't beg you anyway. The young masters and young ladies from Shuo all had a temper. He Yen thought, it's good to be firm, but it's not good to be too firm. If Qin Lisu was here, she would be able to adapt to circumstances. She would be able to avoid a lot of physical pain after entering Wanhua Pavilion. He Yen pulled her up. Let's go. Where to? Of course to my place. This young lady, He Yen helplessly said, I've just kidnapped you. Presumably, not long after, young master's son will search the entire city for your whereabouts. It's so late at night and you have nowhere to go. In the end, you will be found by Sun Ling. He'll only torture you even more. I've worked so hard for an entire night. Is this the result I want? The girl didn't have much strength. He Yen helped her onto the horse. She said hesitantly, if you bring me home, I will bring you trouble. The Sun family is powerful in Liangzhou. You. This little girl's heart was clear. He Yen urged his horse and said, don't worry, my family still has the power to cover the sky in the Great Way. If there was no other way, he could bring up Xiao Ju. Second young master Xiao was powerful in the way. He Yen asked, I forgot to ask you. What's your name? My name is Tao Tao, she said. Tao Tao. The name sounded familiar. He Yen thought about it carefully but couldn't remember where he had heard it before. The situation was urgent, so it wasn't the time to be fooling around. After sending Tao Tao back to the inn, he would interrogate her in detail after tonight. He Yen didn't grow up in Liangzhou, so he didn't know the way to Liangzhou. Fortunately, she had a good memory. She followed the original path and found the inn they came from. Afraid that someone would discover Sun Ling's horse, he and Tao Tao dismounted far away from the inn. He patted the horses but in the opposite direction and watched it gallop into the night. Second young master Xiao was quite good at picking inns. This place wasn't as lively as the Wanhua Pavilion. It was much quieter. It was late at night and almost no one was around. When He Yen helped Tao Tao upstairs, there was no one downstairs. She opened the door and found that Fei Nu wasn't there either. She sighed in relief. There was water in the room. He Yen said, wash your face first. I have some clean clothes for you to change into. You can't wear what you're wearing. You'll catch a cold. She placed the large pile of clothes Qin Lisu gave her in Tao Tao's hands. You can choose what you like. Tao Tao looked at her and blushed. Get out. He Yen suddenly remembered that she was a man. Okay. I'll go out. I'll guard the door. Don't worry and change. After she closed the door, she thought for a moment and slipped outside Xiao Ju's room. She put her ear to the door, wanting to hear if Xiao Ju was there. The lights in the room were off. She didn't know if Xiao Ju was asleep. He Yen whispered, Governor. There was no response. She reached out and gently knocked on the door. Still, there was no answer. He Yen stood up and hesitated for a moment before pushing the door open. The windows in the room weren't closed. The wind from outside leaked in. Under the moonlight, the bed was neat and tidy. There were no traces of anyone sleeping there. Xiao Ju was long gone. The autumn sword he left on the table was also gone. This person and the sword never left their hands. They must have gone out. He Yen also noticed that the familiar guqin was still on the small table next to them. He Yen pursed her lips and cursed in her heart. She said that she was here to fix the guqin, but in reality, she must be doing something confidential in Liangzhou city. Fei Nu wasn't here either. This master and servant must have gone out to do something. They didn't even bring her along. It was obvious that they didn't trust her. Although He Yan already knew that Xiaoju didn't trust him and that it was reasonable, he still felt a little uncomfortable in his heart. In any case, they were schoolmates and had known each other for so many years. When they went out to do things, she wouldn't tell anyone. How petty. She left Xiaoju's room and closed the door behind her. On the other side, Tao Tao had already changed. She opened the door and saw He Yan. She lowered her head and said, "I'm done." He Yan pushed her in and said, "The walls have ears. Come in and talk." She lit the lights in the room. Tao Tao looked much more delicate after changing into Qing Lisu's clothes. Qing Lisu's clothes were mostly bright and colorful. The white robe on the little girl made her look even fairer and prettier. Her eyes were still red and her hair was draped over her shoulders. She was as obedient as the snow-white bunny He Yan had seen before. He could tell that she was a pampered girl who was carefully raised by a rich family. "I'm sorry. I shouldn't have said that. But your taste in clothes is really bad." The little bunny wasn't as cute when she spoke. Tao Tao frowned and pointed at the carp on the clothes. "It's really gaudy." He Yan, this young lady, what time was it that she still had the mood to look at clothes? Were all the young ladies from Shuajing like this? He Yan thought that he wasn't like this in the past either. She coughed lightly and said, "We have no choice now. Miss Tao Tao, you should delay the matter of the clothes for now." She passed Qing Lisu's box of hairpins to her. "First, choose one that you don't think is gaudy and tie up your hair. You can't dress up like a girl right now." "Why?" Tao Tao didn't understand. "Sun Ling will probably send people to find you soon and capture all the women in the city who look like you. We won't be spared." Tao Tao heard this and became nervous. "Then what should we do?" "Don't worry. I'll think of a way to send them away. It's already so late. You haven't eaten anything yet, right? I have some dry food here. Tomorrow morning, I'll ask the inn to make something hot for you to eat. There's also tea here. It's a bit cold, but help yourself." Tao Tao rubbed her stomach and felt hungry. She went to pour tea from the teapot. He Yan saw this and sighed in his heart. This girl was really naive. After the incident at Wanhua Pavilion, she was still so gullible. If she hadn't met him and had met someone else with bad intentions, they would have just needed to coax her a little and put some drugs in her tea. She wouldn't have needed to go through so much trouble to kidnap this girl. Although he had left the He family alone that year, he had followed the Fuyue army. It shouldn't have been so dangerous. In this world, it was always difficult for women. She thought to herself. She originally wanted to hide this matter from Xiaoju, but now that Xiaoju and Fei Nu weren't here, it was difficult to do so. She had originally planned that if Sun Ling's people came looking for her, Xiaoju wouldn't be able to enter the house to investigate. Now that this big Buddha was gone, if she used Xiaoju's name, others would probably think that she was lying. She could only hope that Xiaoju would come back soon. He Yan never thought that there would be a moment like this when he looked forward to second young Master Zhao's return. Tao Tao casually ate a few bites of the biscuits and drank a cup of tea before saying, "I don't want to eat anymore." From the way she wrinkled her nose in disdain, this, "I don't want to eat anymore," was definitely not because she was full, but because it didn't suit her taste. She sat in front of the table and looked at the bronze mirror to tie up her hair. After combing it for a while, she turned around and said, "I'm done." He Yan also felt a little thirsty at this moment. He took a cup of tea and almost spat it out when he saw it. This child's hair was tied up in a mess, as if she had just escaped from a disaster. He couldn't help but ask, Did you tie up your hair?" "I've never combed my own hair in the Fu before. It was always the servant girls who combed it for me." The little girl felt wronged and threw the comb away. "I don't know how to." He Yan, he walked over helplessly and picked up the comb in a good mood. "If you don't know how to, then you don't know how to. Why are you so angry? Let me help you." After saying this, he really took Tao Tao's long hair and combed it for her. Tao Tao was stunned. The youth reflected in the bronze mirror was gentle and handsome. She couldn't help but ask, "You even know how to do this?" "I'll be able to after a few more tries." He Yen replied with a smile. She had been the eldest young master of the He family for many years, but other than the first and second branches of the He family, no one else knew about her change of identity. Therefore, He Yan's manservants and servant girls were never too close to her. Even the matter of tying up her hair could be exposed. Therefore, He Yan began to tie up her own hair from a very young age. Not only did she have to tie her hair, but she also had to do anything that could reveal her secret. Over time, she developed a personality of doing everything by herself. Although she sometimes envied those young masters and young misses who grew up in the palm of their hands, she thought about it again. For example, if she encountered a situation like today, she wouldn't cry endlessly. There were many things that she had more confidence in relying on herself. After tying up her hair, He Yen darkened her face and made her eyebrows thicker. She was already very good at this kind of woman disguising as a man. After the makeup was done, Tao Tao looked at herself in the mirror and said in a daze, Thank you, you're really good at it." He Yen clapped his hands, "Practice makes perfect, that's all." "Miss Tao Tao, please turn your back. I also need to change my clothes." Tonight, Liangzhou City was bustling with activity. Someone actually robbed the little child's carriage not far from County Magistrate Sun's mansion. The person in the carriage was the little child's new concubine. For a moment, Liangzhou City's government officials were in chaos and swore to catch the thief. Young master, that person is clearly her lover." The guard who had been punched by He Yen earlier was now kneeling on the ground and crying for justice. "They are in cahoots. They deliberately took her away. She's not even from Liangzhou. How could she have a lover?" Sun Ling kicked him. "Idiot." Sun Ling was 30 years old and had no achievements. He relied on his father, the county magistrate, to live his life. He bullied people and tyrannized women in Liangzhou City and committed all kinds of crimes. He was born with a rabbit's head and a black birthmark on his cheek, which made him look even scarier. He had countless concubines in his mansion and countless girls from good families who were bullied and abandoned by him. The people of Liangzhou City were angry, but they didn't dare to say anything. They allowed him and his father to do whatever they wanted in the city. Today, however, he was robbed on his way home. Women were small things, but it was humiliating. To Sun Ling, this was a blatant disrespect for the Sun family. "The city gate has been sealed." Another guard said, "That woman is injured. She should still be in the city. We'll check door to door. We'll find her whereabouts." "Idiot," Sun Ling scolded again. "Since when did the people of Liangzhou City have the guts to mess with the Almighty? Since you said that person knew that I, Sun Ling, wanted her and still dared to make a move, he must be reckless. He's probably not from Liangzhou. That woman isn't from Liangzhou either. They might be in cahoots." The previous guard said again. "I don't care if they're in cahoots or not. If he dares to go against the Sun family, he must be prepared to die." "Say it again. What does that person look like?" "His face was covered, so I couldn't see what he looked like. He's about 7 feet tall, a head shorter than me. He's thin, but he's dressed very well. The material of his clothes doesn't look like ordinary goods." The guard racked his brains to recall. "Anyway, he shouldn't be poor." Sun Ling thought for a moment and said, "I understand." The two guards looked at him in unison. The people in the city continue to block the city gate. "The rest of you, follow me to check the inn." "Inn? Young master, why?" Sun Ling scolded, "Idiots will always be idiots. Why don't you think about it? Since he's probably not from Liangzhou, he must be staying in an inn. Even if he's dressed well, there's no way he's staying in a shabby inn. Why don't you just look for those good inns that cost a lot of money?" I see. The two guards quickly praised, young master is wise, young master is wise. Humph, Sun Ling smiled proudly. The birthmark on his cheek looked even scarier. He said darkly, when has there been such a fearless person in Liangzhou? I want to see who's so bold. And that bitch, she doesn't know what's good for her. She's done it again and again. I'm afraid she doesn't know how powerful I am. Don't let any of them go. The night in the city seemed to be lit up by torches. It was supposed to be time for bed, but every household was woken up by the sound of horse hooves. The bailiffs and city guards rushed into the houses of the commoners and interrogated them one by one. Logically speaking, this shouldn't be the case. However, the Sun family had abused their power for a long time. When they heard that Sun Ling's concubine had been kidnapped, many people secretly cursed. Hey, nonsense. Where did this concubine come from? With that kind of appearance, even if her family was extremely wealthy, they wouldn't take a liking to her. They must have kidnapped some innocent girl from somewhere. How is this any different from robbers? Robbers have to pick the night to act. Who would dare to rob in broad daylight? But weren't they abducted? Which righteous person couldn't stand it anymore and took action? If it's really a righteous person, I'll pray in front of the Bodhisattva every day that he's safe and healthy and doesn't get caught by the Sun family. AI, the world has changed. These voices naturally didn't dare to appear in front of the soldiers. They waited for the people to leave before whispering to each other and quickly disappearing into the night without a trace. The inns in the city were also in trouble tonight. The shopkeepers and waiters, along with the guests upstairs, were all pulled out and interrogated one by one. Those who appeared to be well off were interrogated even more carefully. Not even a fly was spared. He Yen sat on the edge of the bed. The lights were already off, and only a little moonlight came in through the window. It was already late at night, but Xiao Ju and Fei Nu still hadn't returned. She thought to herself, are they not coming back? It was just like those poor families who couldn't afford to raise an extra child. They took their youngest son to a crowded street and lied to him that they were going to buy candy. In the blink of an eye, they were gone and abandoned by the side of the road. Did Xiao Ju abandon her? She was too pitiful. She only had so much money on her, and she still had to pay for the inn tomorrow. She still had to eat, and she still had to go back to the Liangzhou City Guards institution. Was this something that a human could do? If that was really the case, she would go next door and sell the evening zither tomorrow. He Yan's thoughts ran wild. Would this person come back or not? If not, she and Tao Tao could each have a room tonight. It wouldn't be a waste. As she was thinking, Tao Tao, who was also sitting on the edge of the bed, whispered, "You won't run away, right?" Ah! He Yan was astonished. They said that Sun Ling is very powerful in Liangzhou, and everyone is afraid of the Sun family's power. Before, I asked many people for help, but when they heard that it was Sun Ling, no one dared to help. When Tao Tao said this, her expression became angry. When she was stranded in the 10,000 Flowers Pavilion, she didn't fall into someone's trap right from the start. She struggled along the way and looked for opportunities to ask for help. She looked for many people. There were tall and strong warriors, and there were also scholars who were full of righteousness and honor. There were rich merchants who were old enough to be her father, and there were also chivalrous people who carried swords and traveled everywhere. She tried her best to find people who looked like they had the ability to save her, but when they heard that it was someone that Sun Ling wanted, they left with their tails between their legs. Even if she promised a lot of money and threw out her identity, no one cared about her. In the end, Tao Tao despaired. When she threw out that piece of paper, she didn't think that there would be a tomorrow. She only thought that if she saw Sun Ling, she would die with him. Who knew that at the last moment, someone would rush out? She turned her head to look at the person beside her. The young man tilted his head, thinking about something. It was very strange. Such a weak-looking young man could make her feel an inexplicable sense of security. Perhaps it was because of the gentle smile on her face, or her clear eyes. Tao Tao inexplicably trusted this person, but she was also a little worried. She said, "A strong dragon can't suppress a local snake, you know about this?" He Yen smiled. "Actually, I'm also a local snake. I'm very powerful." Tao Tao saw that her expression was relaxed, so she also relaxed a little. She looked at He Yen and couldn't help but ask one last question. She asked, "The Sun family is so domineering. You're not from Liangzhou, so you don't know what kind of trouble you'll get into if you save me. They don't dare to make a move, so why did you save me?" Why did this child have so many questions? He Yen turned her head and saw the little girl looking at her with red eyes. She was curious and expectant, so she couldn't help but reach out to touch her head. "Because you're a woman," she said silently in her heart, "and I'm also a woman." The noise surrounded the entire inn. The night was illuminated red by the light of the fire. Everyone in the inn was suddenly awakened by the officers who stood at the door and questioned one by one. Sun Ling stood at the door and his gaze fell on the last room upstairs. He said, "Where's that room? Why didn't you open the door?" The innkeeper trembled as he knocked on the door. Young master, young master." After a while, someone shuffled to open the door. It was a delicate young man wearing an inner garment. He said sleepily, "It's so late. What's the matter?" Before he finished speaking, the officers went in to search. There was also a servant in the room, who was busy putting clothes on the young man. "Young master, don't catch a cold." The officers went in to search, but they didn't find anything. They quickly came out and shook their heads at Sun Ling. Sun Ling looked at the young man in front of him. This young man was young and seemed to be pampered. His servant was busy putting on his boots. "What are you doing?" He Yen frowned. "You didn't even greet me." "Greet?" Sun Ling sneered. "What a joke. There's no place in Liangzhou city that I, Sun Ling, need to greet." He looked at He Yen and remembered what the guard said before. He was about 7 feet tall and had a thin body. This young man was exactly like that. "What's your name?" he asked. "Qingli Su," He Yen answered. "Pa." The servant lost his grip on the boots and fell to the ground. Everyone followed his gaze. Sun Ling's expression changed. He suddenly said, "You, raise your head." He was referring to the servant. He Yen had a bad feeling. He asked, "What are you doing? It's broad daylight, and you still want to snatch my people? Your man." Sun Ling stared at him with a sinister gaze. "Don't speak too early. The one on the ground, raise your head." The person on the ground didn't move. He lowered his head and looked carefully. His hands were still trembling. Seeing this, Sun Ling's expression became more ferocious. He stepped forward and was about to pull the servant's hair. The next moment, He Yen stood in front of the servant. She grabbed Sun Ling's arm. "Young master, watch your words and actions. You're the assassin who stole my concubine, aren't you?" Sun Ling laughed. His birthmark looked like a demon tattoo. "You're dead," he said. "Men, capture the two of them." "Arrest me?" He Yen laughed. She said, "I advise you to think twice before you act." "Do you know who my uncle is?" Sun Ling asked, "Who's your uncle?" "My uncle is the General Feng Yun, the current commander-in-chief of the Right Army, second young Master Shao." "Young Master Shao, are you sure you want to arrest me?" He Yen raised his eyebrows. Sun Ling was stunned. After a moment, he laughed. He laughed until tears came out. He pointed at He Yen and asked the people around him, "Did you hear that? Who did he say his uncle is?" The people around all laughed. "Brat." Sun Ling stopped laughing and stared at He Yen. He said fiercely, "Since your uncle is a Shao Ju, let him come out." "So what if he's a Shao Ju?" "Today, in front of your uncle, I'll make you beg for death." Is that so? An unfamiliar voice sounded behind him. Sun Ling turned around. A young man as bright as the moon slowly walked over with guards behind him. His voice was low and had a cold mocking tone. You can try. Chapter 91. Why don't you give it a try? There was a moment of silence at the entrance. After a while, He Yen suddenly regained his senses and shouted, Uncle. This was this kid's uncle. Sun Ling sized up the youth in front of him. Seeing this young man's handsome appearance and elegant demeanor, he couldn't help but feel jealous. Because of the large birthmark on his face, he knew that he was ugly, so he especially hated good-looking people. He had countless concubines in his residence and often tainted good girls outside. However, it wasn't entirely because he was lustful. Even if he took them in his hands, he would never pamper them. Those beauties often ended up in miserable states in his hands. When Sun Ling saw that someone else had something he didn't have, he wanted to destroy it. The man in front of him was too outstanding. Not only in Liangzhou, but even in Dawei, he could be considered one of the best. Uncle. He Yen jumped up and ran behind Xiaoju. Only his head poked out and pointed at Sun Ling. This person bullied me. She shouted innocently, as if she was a child who was bullied outside and went home to complain to her elders. Fei Nu saw this and was speechless. Xiaoju's body also stiffened. He endured the disdain and ignored the person pulling his clothes behind him. He only looked at Sun Ling. Was it you? Sun Ling's heart skipped a beat. This young man's appearance was too good. His expression was calm, but there was a hint of sharpness. Even if he was asking a question calmly, one couldn't help but feel a chill in one's heart and feel an inexplicable sense of fear. He composed himself and looked at Xiaoju. He said coldly, It was me. Who are you? Xiaoju. Xiaoju. Sun Ling was suspicious. He had never seen Xiaoju before. Half a year ago, he heard that Xiaoju had brought new recruits to Liangzhou to guard the Liangzhou city. However, he had never been to Liangzhou city or the Sun family. Of course, Sun Ling had also heard of Xiaoju's name. He was a famous young killer in Dawei and was handsome and beautiful. His life was good, but other than that, how could he prove that he was a Xiaoju? Moreover, how could the commander-in-chief of the right military force bring only one guard with him? Even though he was the son of a county magistrate, he still had to be surrounded by attendants when he went out. What was up with this nephew of his? No matter what, these people looked strange. Sun Ling asked the manservant beside him in a low voice, Have you heard about General Feng Yun coming to the city recently? The servant shook his head. No. Hearing this, Sun Ling became even more suspicious. However, he had always been cunning and did not want to jump to conclusions so easily. Thus, he looked at Xiaoju and sneered, Since you say that you are Xiaoju, do you have the jade token to prove your identity? Xiaoju, no. He didn't even have a jade token. Sun Ling was even more certain that the people in front of him were imposters. Thinking about how he had almost been frightened by the impostor, Sun Ling couldn't help but feel annoyed. He looked at Xiaoju and shouted, I don't care who you are, but you dared to kidnap an official's wife. This is a capital offense. Men, take them down. What official's wife? He Yen poked his head out from behind Xiaoju and shouted, That's my servant. If you want to say that she's an official's wife, please show evidence. Where's her contract? You don't even have a contract and you're just randomly arresting people. Is there still any law? Law? Sun Ling smiled ferociously. In Liangzhou, my Sun family is the law. Everyone, do it. A group of soldiers came forward aggressively. He Yen was now playing the role of the weak Qingli Su, so of course, he wouldn't do anything. She screamed and shouted as if she wanted to see the world in chaos, murder. Soldiers are killing people. There were other guests in the inn, so when they heard this, there was an uproar. Even the dogs on the streets began to bark. Xiao Ju said, Fei Nu. The guards in black immediately stood in front of Xiao Ju, and He Yan took the opportunity to see clearly. She didn't know if Fei Nu was a member of the Nine Flags Battalion, but looking at his skills, he was comparable to her in her previous life. If this was the standard of the Nine Flags Battalion, then Lady He's current body was probably not qualified. She couldn't take her eyes off him and pulled Xiao Ju's clothes until Xiao Ju scolded in a low voice, "Let go." Oh. He Yan came back to his senses and quickly let go of his hand. Seeing that He Yan's sleeve was wrinkled from his grip, he stroked it twice in an attempt to smooth it out. He said fawningly, "Uncle, Big Brother Fei Nu is really skilled." Amazing. She didn't even need to think about it. At this moment, she was probably the same as He Yunsheng. Xiao Ju didn't pay attention to her. The officers and soldiers in Liangzhou's yamen were all made from the same mold as Sun Ling. They were served good wine and good food every day, and they had already developed the habit of only eating and not doing anything. They could capture the weak old and weak women and children, but when they met someone who could fight, they were completely helpless. Fei Nu single-handedly beat them all to the ground. Seeing this, Sun Ling took a step back and ordered his servant, Go and call everyone here." The servant turned to run, but before he could take a step, he was hit by a stone. His legs went weak, and he knelt down. He Yan secretly threw away the stone in his hand. Of course, he couldn't let anyone report this. Although it wasn't that he couldn't defeat them, it was tiring to fight back and forth. Fei Nu also needed to rest. Suddenly, there was no one around him that he could use. Sun Ling was half angry and half afraid. He pointed at Xiao Ju and said, You dare to beat up officers and soldiers. Do you still have the law? Didn't you say that you are the law in Liangzhou? He Yan felt that he was acting like a dog threatening to bully others because of its master's power. He hid behind Xiao Ju and talked back to Sun Ling, Sir, your position as the law isn't that great. You can't even fight as well as other people's guards. You. Sun Ling pulled out the whip from his waist and was about to swing it at He Yan's face. He Yan shrank behind Xiao Ju. In the next moment, Fei Nu had already grabbed the whip and kicked it. Sun Ling tripped and fell to the ground. Fei Nu took the opportunity to step on his head and stomp his face into the ground. He Yan was speechless as he watched. This slave Fei didn't utter a single word. He was quite heartless. Young master, should we kill him? Fei Nu asked. You dare to kill me, my father is from Liangzhou's Ji County. Sun Ling was stepped on until he couldn't speak clearly. He was angry and afraid. But at this moment, he still didn't believe that this person would really kill him. He didn't forget to threaten, My father will not let you go. You will all die. You are still young. Don't curse others. Seeing that he had been restrained, He Yan walked forward and squatted next to Sun Ling. She tilted her head and looked at him. Besides, who doesn't die? Do you think you are a monster and will never die? Then I really admire you. Her tone was sincere and lecturing. It was even more infuriating and humiliating than Fei Nu who had stepped on his face. Sun Ling was so angry that he couldn't speak. He Yan didn't sympathize with this person at all. In this world, she hated people who bullied the weak the most. Men who bullied women were even more detestable. If they had any conscience, they wouldn't do it. Only incompetent men would bully women. To be able to do this to a cute little girl, this person was a beast. She wanted to continue to anger Sun Ling. Suddenly, there was a commotion downstairs. It seemed that someone was leading a group of people upstairs. She had just stood up when someone rushed to the door and shouted, My son. He Yan followed the voice and saw a man rushing in front of Sun Ling. Fei Nu raised her foot. He held Sun Ling's head and said anxiously, My son. Are you hurt anywhere? It was a middle-aged man who looked very similar to Sun Ling. He also had the same black birthmark on his cheek as Sun Ling. But because he was older than Sun Ling, other than being ugly, he had a wretched and vulgar appearance. Coupled with his gorgeous clothes, he looked out of place. He Yen didn't think that she was a superficial person who judged people by their appearance. When she saw this person, she couldn't help but look away. Then, she looked at Xiao Ju's face and Xiao Ju's waist. She suddenly felt much more comfortable. This was what it meant to be beautiful. Father, Sun Ling saw that the people supporting him had arrived. He pointed at He Yen and Xiao Ju and shouted, "These two people pretended to be court officials. They kidnapped my concubine and injured my people. Father, arrest them. I want them to die without a burial place. How dare you?" Hearing this, the person was furious. He pointed at He Yen and the others and said, "Men, arrest them. So you're from Sun Ji County?" He Yen smiled and said, "Why waste time? Your people can't beat them. You're just a bunch of good-for-nothings." Probably not expecting to meet such stubborn people, Magistrate Sun was stunned. When he came back to his senses, he was even more furious and said, "Arrest them. Kill them. Kill them." He Yen frowned. No wonder it was said that the father and son of the Sun family could do whatever they wanted in Liangzhou. Even the officials of the capital did not have this power, but they could do it. Sun Xiangfu, the person who interrupted him, was Xiao Ju. He looked at the other party and said coldly. His voice was like a knife, sharp and piercing, "Open your eyes and see who I am." When he received the news and rushed over, Sun Xiangfu did not have time to hear what had happened. He only knew that Sun Ling had brought people to arrest them. Who knew that they would be bullied instead? As a father, he supported his son. Moreover, this was Liangzhou. Sun Xiangfu did not think too much. When he arrived and saw how badly Sun Ling had been beaten up, Sun Xiangfu's heart ached. The light was dim, so he didn't take a good look at Xiao Ju's face. When he heard her words, he looked up seriously. With one look, he was stunned. A moment later, Sun Xiangfu suddenly lifted the corner of his robe and knelt down. He pressed his head against the ground and said in a trembling voice, I didn't know that the governor was already here. Please forgive me for not going out to meet you." "Governor?" Sun Ling looked at his father in surprise. Seeing Sun Xiangfu come to his senses and look at his cowardly appearance, he knew that he would not be able to make any waves. He Yen smiled and said, "Magistrate Sun, what kind of crime do you want me to forgive?" "When little young master came upstairs, he wanted to kidnap my servant and take my life. He wanted to make my life worse than death in front of my uncle. He was very impressive. Now he wants us to forgive him. How would we dare? Isn't that right, uncle?" She looked at Xiao Ju and confidently complained. This time, other than Xiao Ju, his nephew, the young master of the right minister's residence, had also sent the invitation. At this moment, this young man was calling Xiao Ju uncle. It must be Qing Lisu. Sun Xiangfu did not expect that his unfilial son would offend his uncle and nephew. He felt bitter inside. He slapped Sun Ling's face, and Sun Ling's head was slapped to the side. This slap was very strong, and everyone could hear the crisp sound. Sun Xiangfu knelt down and kowtowed as he said, "This is all because I did not teach my son well. My son was blind and did not recognize you and little young master. I hope that you will forgive him. When I go back, I will teach my son well." Seeing that Xiao Ju still did not say anything, Sun Xiangfu gritted his teeth and slapped him again. Sun Ling was already injured, and his reaction was not as good as before. The slap just now had already stunned him. Now that he was unexpectedly slapped again, he immediately screamed. However, Sun Xiangfu would not stop. Since he wanted to show Xiao Ju, he could not be soft-hearted. He slapped him and scolded, "You unfilial son, you have forgotten all the etiquette and shame that I have taught you. How can you slander someone for no reason? I know that you admire Military Governor Xiao and think that someone is pretending to be the Military Governor Xiao, so you are so angry, but this is the real military governor Xiao. You have done a bad thing with good intentions. He Yan. She gasped in amazement as she listened. Look, officials really knew how to talk. In her previous life, even when she was a third-rank general, she did not have such a glib tongue. If she could have such a glib tongue, wouldn't she also be a first-rank official and be conferred a title of nobility? Sun Xiangfu slapped Sun Ling more than 10 times in a row. Sun Ling was beaten until he screamed again and again. When Sun Xiangfu saw this, his heart ached. Although he had many wives and concubines, he only had one son. Now that he was doing this for Xiaoju, he hoped that Xiaoju would give him a way out. However, this cold and emotionless commander-in-chief of the Right Corps only looked on coldly and did not say anything. If this continued, Sun Ling might be beaten to death. Sun Xiangfu had no choice. He let go of his hand and crawled to Xiaoju. He kept kowtowing to Xiaoju. Commander-in-chief, he will die if you hit him again. I beg you to give my son a way out. Commander-in-chief, if you want to punish someone, punish me. For a moment, Sun Xiangfu kept kowtowing on the ground. Sun Ling was lying on the side, bleeding from the corner of his mouth. He looked quite pitiful. If he had not seen Sun Ling's character before, He Yan would have been touched by the father-son relationship. After all, the one who did the evil was the son. What did the father do wrong? However, Xiaoju did not disappoint He Yan. Even when Sun Xiangfu's head was bleeding, Xiaoju's expression did not change at all. When Sun Xiangfu felt that he could not hold on any longer, Xiaoju spoke. He said, "It is the father's fault for not teaching his son well." Sun Xiangfu. He lowered his head and looked down at Sun Xiangfu. His voice was very calm. Have you forgotten how Zhao Nua died? As soon as he said this, Sun Xiangfu's sobbing stopped abruptly. He felt a chill from head to toe. How did Zhao Nua die? Zhao Nua was pushed to the front of the monument and beheaded by this person in front of him. Who was Zhao Nua? Zhao Nua was the eldest son of the current Minister of Revenue. How could he forget this? When Zhao Nua was in trouble, many officials and nobles came forward to plead for mercy because of Lord Zhao. The 16-year-old Xiaoju did not even bat an eyelid and killed him. Even the emperor could not do anything about it. This person was going to be serious. He could even kill the son of the Minister of Revenue. Although Sun Xiangfu was a tyrant in Liangzhou, in the end, he was just a small county magistrate. Sun Xiangfu was so scared that tears almost fell from his eyes. He trembled and said, "Commander-in-chief, please spare my life. Please forgive me, Commander-in-chief." Sun Ling did not know why his father was so afraid of Xiaoju, but when he saw his father like this, he could not help but panic. The guests upstairs and downstairs were all shocked by this turn of events. They were very happy to see the county magistrate and his son, who had always done all kinds of evil in Liangzhou, in such a sorry state. After a long time, Xiaoju turned around and said, "Get up." Sun Xiangfu was so weak that he almost fainted. He looked at Xiaoju's back and said, "Commander-in-chief. If there's a next time, I'll take his life," he said. Sun Xiangfu was overjoyed. He dragged Sun Ling and kowtowed to Xiaoju, saying, "Commander-in-chief is magnanimous and does not care about my son. Don't worry, if there's a next time, there's no need for you to do anything. I'll take his life myself." Xiaoju turned around and walked into the room, saying, "Take your men and leave this place immediately." "Commander-in-chief, are you not going to stay in your residence?" Sun Xiangfu asked carefully. "No need. I still have things to do in Liangzhou. When Yuan Baozhen arrives, I'll pay him a visit." Sun Xiangfu wanted to say something, but he restrained himself. Today's events were too sudden, and it was not a good place to talk. It was better to take Sun Ling back and find a doctor to check on him. He agreed to Xiaoju's words and ordered his men to move. Sun Xiangfu moved very quickly. In less than half an hour, his men had all left. They even cleaned up the things that had been broken. The guests also left. The innkeeper did not expect such a big figure to be living in the inn. There was fear in his eyes. Yen patted him on the shoulder and said, "It's okay. We're all very friendly. Don't be afraid. Your mung bean noodles are very delicious. I want to eat more tomorrow." The innkeeper saw that the young man was innocent and felt relieved. After the innkeeper left, Yen breathed a sigh of relief. When he turned around and saw Xiao Ju's back, his heart was in his throat again. How should he explain this to this commander-in-chief? Xiao Ju did not go into his room. Instead, he went into Yan's room. Fei Nu also followed. When Yan walked in, he saw Tao Tao hiding in the corner. She was probably frightened. When Xiao Ju came in, she hid in the corner with her head lowered. Yan walked over and patted her back gently. He comforted her and said, "They're gone. It's okay now." Xiao Ju and Fei Nu could not help but look at him when they heard his gentle words. Yan saw this and said, "Uncle, you're not going to tell me," he stared at Yan and said coldly, "that your fiancé came to Liangzhou to find you?" Fiancé? Yan thought for a moment before remembering that she seemed to have made up the excuse of being a fiancé in order to prevent the female doctor, Shen Mushua, from discovering her identity as a woman. She didn't expect Xiao Ju to still remember. "Don't say that, uncle," Yan said seriously. "I was in Liangzhou city and saw Sun Ling snatching a woman and forcing her to become a prostitute. I couldn't stand it and helped. Who knew that Sun Ling was so lawless in Liangzhou that he chased me all the way to the inn? She smiled flatteringly. "I was also promoting your good reputation of getting rid of evil for the people." Xiao Ju sneered, "I don't need that kind of thing." Yan did not know how to respond. She thought for a while and decided to change her words, "I was really scared to death. Fortunately, uncle, you came in time. If not, I don't know how badly I would have been bullied by Sun Ling. I might not even be able to see you in the future." "You are my nephew." Xiao Ju heard this and said leisurely, "Who dares to bully you?" It was a nice thing to say, but why did it sound so wrong? Yan thought, forget it. She already called him uncle. In any case, he had already taken advantage of her. He did not care about how much he took. It was just a verbal advantage. He would not lose anything. "Then, uncle, let's send this girl back home. If she stays in Liangzhou, that bastard Sun Ling will definitely take revenge." Yan tried to ask for his opinion. "You deal with it yourself." How heartless, Yan thought in his heart. At this time, the servant who had been silent all this time suddenly raised her head and looked at Xiao Ju, saying, "Second young master Xiao." Although her voice was hesitant, it was not soft. It was especially clear in the quiet night. Xiao Ju looked at her and saw that the servant was a young man with slightly dark skin. His eyes were red and swollen, but his voice was feminine and timid. She could not help but frown. Seeing her frown, the servant was even more afraid and blurted out, "I am Song Tao Tao." So her surname was not Tao, but Song. Yan thought, why did the name Song Tao Tao sound so familiar? Where did he hear it before? Song Tao Tao took the initiative to call Xiao Ju. Could it be that the two knew each other? Yan thought and asked. She said, You know him." Song Tao Tao looked at Yan with a complicated expression and said, "Second young master Xiao, is the person who is going to be engaged to me." Yan said, "What? Uncle?" Song Tao Tao finished her sentence. Yan breathed a sigh of relief. She knew it. She had never heard of Xiao Ju's engagement. How could someone suddenly appear to be engaged? It turned out to be her uncle. She suddenly came back to her senses and looked at Xiao Ju, asking, "That, Commander-in-Chief, how many nephews do you have?" Xiao Ju looked at her as if she was looking at an idiot. Yan immediately understood. This was Qing Lisu's fiancé. Qing Lisu came to Liangzhou from the Shuo capital to escape the marriage. What a coincidence, his fiancée had the same idea. Who knew that she would be kidnapped to Liangzhou and saved by him? What kind of heaven-sent fate was this? They were probably destined to be together. No wonder when Sun Ling came and He Yan introduced himself as Qing Lisu, Song Taotao was so shocked that her boots fell off. It turned out that she was frightened by the news of her fiancé. Second young master Xiao. Song Taotao looked very conflicted. I don't want to go back to the Shuo capital for now. I heard that you are stationed at the Liangzhou garrison. Can I go with you to the garrison? I promise I won't cause you any trouble. Are you sure you want to go to the Liangzhou garrison? Second young master Zhao's expression was cold. Your fiancé is here right now. Song Taotao's expression stiffened. He Yan felt that she was about to cry. Miss Song, don't you like young master Cheng? He Yan said in a small voice. I think he's quite good. Qing Lisu was a good person, other than being a little stupid. Sometimes, he was a little naive, but he had a good heart. His appearance could be considered handsome and cute. His family background didn't need to be mentioned. No matter what, he shouldn't be disliked to this extent. He doesn't know anything. When the little girl mentioned Qing Lisu, her eyes were full of disdain. He's not good at literature or martial arts, and he's not motivated. I don't like him. He's not even as good as you. He Yan was flattered. She had only known Song Taotao for half a day, but she had already received such a high evaluation. She was flattered. Xiao Ju glanced at her and said to Song Taotao, we'll talk about this later. You should rest today. I'll call a doctor tomorrow. Song Taotao nodded. He Yan yawned and felt a little sleepy. Because Song Taotao was a girl, the shopkeeper found another room for Song Taotao, which was right next to He Yan and the others. Fei Nu lived with He Yan. She slept on the small couch on the side and gave the bed to He Yan. He Yan was very grateful and even felt a little guilty. However, this guilt was quickly washed away by other things. Saving Song Taotao tonight was really a coincidence. Even she herself didn't expect that the little girl she saved was Qing Lisu's fiancé. These two people really had the temperament of a child. They ran away from the marriage without saying a word. They even ran to Liangzhou, which was thousands of miles away. Fortunately, He Yan ran into them today. Otherwise, she really didn't know what to do in the future. Sun Xiangfu seemed to be very afraid of Xiao Ju. Xiao Ju's attitude was so arrogant that it made people's hair stand on end. He Yan felt that even when she was at the peak of her military exploits and had the highest status, she wouldn't speak to her colleagues or subordinates like this. In the end, this was the difference between people. No wonder Qing Lisu was raised to be a good-for-nothing son, who didn't know anything and was always so self-righteous. With such a powerful uncle, he could do whatever he wanted in the way. Why would he need to be good at both civil and martial arts? Tonight, she just casually complained and was able to make the county magistrate and his son, who were so powerful in Liangzhou, kowtow and apologize. This kind of feeling of being protected was quite refreshing. It also felt good. Now that He Yan thought about it, he felt quite envious of Qing Lisu. Song Taotao couldn't be left alone in Liangzhou. She probably couldn't lack people by her side. Who knew if the father and son would wait for an opportunity to take revenge? The best way was to send her back to her parents in Shuajing. Of course, it would be best if she could be protected by the Song family. But now that Song Taotao had run to Liangzhou to escape the marriage, she might not obediently return to Shuajing. Moreover, it wasn't easy to find someone to send her back. In order to protect Song Taotao's safety, he could only temporarily keep her in the Liangzhou guard. He wondered what kind of expression Qing Lisu would have when he saw Song Taotao. The two of them wouldn't fight, right? Even if they did, it didn't matter. In any case, there was a ready-made practice field. He Yan didn't even know what he was thinking. Those thoughts gathered together to form a question. That was, who exactly was Song Tao Tao? Why was this name so familiar? There were many times when he almost thought of it, but he couldn't remember it. Fei Nu was a martial artist. He didn't make a single sound when he slept and was very quiet. He Yan had long been used to the thunderous snoring of the Liangzhou guard. For a moment, he couldn't fall asleep and turned over. Who knew that she would join the army and become a nephew? It really was inconceivable. Join the army, join the army. In the darkness, He Yan suddenly sat up. She remembered who Song Tao Tao was. In reality, back then, He Yan had quarreled with He Yuanqing for the first time and then joined the Fuyue army under the cover of night because of this Miss Song. Chapter 92. He Yan entered the Virtuous Prosperity Hall at the age of 14 and joined the Fuyue army at the age of 15. She joined the army in a hurry and no one knew about it. The Shibao in the Virtuous Prosperity Hall were all shocked. Later, when she returned to the capital, she had already received meritorious service and was conferred an imperial title. Thus, the He family did not pursue the matter as to why she joined the army. Now that she thought about it, if she did not receive any meritorious service at the time and was just an ordinary soldier, she might not have ended up like this after a few years of wandering from place to place before returning to the He family. He Yan still remembered Song Tao Tao. At the age of 15, He Yan used the identity of He Rufei to study in the Virtuous Prosperity Hall. Her aptitude was mediocre and she was a girl. She was naturally not as strong as men. She really could not be compared to the youths in the Virtuous Prosperity Hall. He Yuanqing gradually saw this, but he did not blame her. He Yan also thought that she could continue to live peacefully like this. Until that day. There were 2 days every month in the Virtuous Prosperity Hall when the students could go home. But because of the rainy season, the rainwater washed down the signboard at the entrance of the Virtuous Prosperity Hall. The Shibao let the students go home 1 day in advance and come back 3 days later. He Yan went back in a hurry and no one knew. She first changed her clothes and then went to find He Yuanqing. Every month when she returned to the He family, He Yuanqing would ask her about how she was doing in the Virtuous Prosperity Hall. This kind of distant and almost monitoring question did not make He Yan feel warm. Every time she spoke to He Yuanqing, she was actually a bit nervous. But that day, when she went, He Yuanqing had not returned. Even the manservant was not at the door. She first sat in He Yuanqing's study and waited. There was a screen in the study. He Yan felt that since she had nothing to do, she might as well sit behind the screen and read a book for a while. She had not sat for a moment when someone came in. The one who spoke was He Yuanliang's voice. He said, "He Yan's matter, what do you think?" He Yan, who was about to go out, heard this and was momentarily stunned. She wanted to go around the screen, but then she stopped. She did not go out. Instead, she shrank her body back. He Yuanliang and He Yuanqing had different temperaments. He Yuanqing looked gentle, but he was actually very strict. Later on, Madam He gave birth to other children and treated them very harshly. He Yuanliang, her biological father, had a completely different personality. He was always smiling. He also pampered and spoiled his children, except for her. He Yan's feelings towards He Yuanliang were very complicated. If one were to say that she revered He Yuanqing, her adoptive father, and her eldest uncle, then towards He Yuanliang, there was a trace of imperceptible dependence and expectation. She had hoped that He Yuanliang would treat her as kindly and affectionately as he treated his younger sisters, but He Yuanliang did not. Every time he looked at her, it was as if he was looking at his nephew. He was polite and at most lecturing her a little. In this way, after being disappointed many times, He Yan didn't force it. But today, he heard his name from his biological father's mouth. He Yan didn't know why he hid here and didn't go out. She's doing very well now. She's studying in the Xian Chang dojo and no one has found out. She's 15 now. At most, before she's 18, she has to settle her marriage. He Yen, who was hiding behind the screen, held her breath for a moment. Marriage? She had never thought about this. She was now using the identity of Hirufei, a man. How could she get married? Once she got married, what would Hirufei do? Who would be this Hirufei? She thought it was natural. She was a woman, so she naturally had to get married to a man. After all, she didn't have the time to polish herself. However, He Yuanliang's following words shocked her. Eldest brother, have you seen a suitable young lady in the capital? Young lady? How could it be a young lady? He Yen raised her head. The two people on the other side of the screen had their backs to her. She couldn't see their expressions clearly, but from their tone, she could tell that they were calm and didn't feel that their words were shocking at all. The Vice Director of Internal Servants, Song Ci, has 2 daughters. The eldest daughter is already married, and the younger daughter is 11 years old now. He Yuanqing said, she's a bit young, but when He Yen turns 18, she'll be of marriageable age. After she reaches marriageable age, she can wait 2 years before getting married. Song Ci's daughter. He Yuanliang hesitated, is it that little girl called Song Tao Tao? I remember that Song Ci searched through all the merchants in Shuajing to find a birthday gift for her daughter 2 years ago. That's right, He Yuanqing stroked his beard and smiled, Song Ci's Fu doesn't have any young boys, only 2 daughters. Now that the eldest daughter is married, she's especially doting on the younger daughter. If we can get married to the Song family, we'll have the Song family's help. Why should we worry that our Fu won't prosper? He Yuanliang heard this and relaxed his expression, only saying, eldest brother's words are reasonable. Why don't I host a banquet in a few days to invite Song Ci to the Fu? We can talk about the children. At the very least, we have to let him know that we have this idea. The two of them spoke happily and harmoniously, as if this marriage was just a transaction. This wasn't a big deal. Nowadays, in the noble's Fu, women were mostly used as a bargaining chip. But using her as a bargaining chip was one thing, but how could they not take her identity into consideration? She was a woman. How could a woman marry another woman? If they really did get married, wouldn't they be harming the girl's life? He Yen thought this in his heart. Suddenly, he bumped into the screen and made a sound. He Yuanqing turned his head and shouted, who is it? He Yen saw that he had been discovered and simply stood up, saying, it's me. He Yen. He Yuanqing let out a sigh of relief and then frowned, saying, why are you here? Shouldn't you be at the Xianchang dojo today? Bao told us to leave school a day early, so I came here to find father. He Yen said this and paused, secretly glancing at He Yuanliang. He Yuanliang revealed his usual smile, his expression not changing at all because he called He Yuanqing father. It was just another disappointment, why would he not give up? He Yen lowered his head, hiding the disappointment in his eyes. I have matters to discuss with your second uncle right now. Come find me later. He Yuanqing said, go see your mother first. He Yen did not move. He Yen. He Yuanqing's brows furrowed again. I already heard what father and second uncle said just now. He Yen raised his head, his voice calm. Father, I am a woman, how can I marry the second miss of the Song family? Not expecting that He Yen would speak like this, the 2 brothers of the He family stilled. This is not something you should care about. A moment later, He Yuanqing responded, I will arrange everything for you. I will not marry the second miss of the Song family. As a woman, it is enough to sacrifice me. There is no need to involve unrelated people, He Yen said. She was already 15 years old now, a bit taller than before, and dressed as a youth. Her eyes were clear and magnanimous. Standing here, she was tall and straight like a poplar tree, like a stranger. He Yuanqing angrily said, what do you mean? Are you resentful of us? Are you blaming us for sacrificing your right to be a woman? He Yuanliang looked at her with a smile. He Yan, how can you speak to Big Brother like this? Big Brother is doing this for your own good. He Yan thought, was this really for her own good? When she was studying in the Xian Cheng dojo, the teacher had taught her, a heart of compassion is the end of benevolence, a heart of shame is the end of righteousness, a heart of refusal is the end of propriety, a heart of right and wrong is the end of wisdom. But what the He family wanted her to do now was to be heartless, unrighteous, impolite, and unwise. How preposterous was this? He Yan was not afraid, loudly replying, I will never agree to be engaged to the second miss of the Song family. Not only that, I will not marry any woman in this life and delay the lives of others. He Yuansheng and He Yuanliang were both dumbfounded. The He family knew what kind of temper He Yan had. She was gentle and easy to talk to, even a little timid and weak. In the He family, she would do whatever she was told to do and didn't like to cause trouble. If it wasn't for the accidental exchange of identities, she would be the same as all the other ordinary young ladies in Shuajing, taciturn, obedient, and living her life like a puppet. But what was she like now? He Yan, you dare to speak to me like this? He Yuansheng was really angry. When he was angry, his facial features were very fierce, and the children of the He family's first branch were very afraid of him. He Yan looked at him, unmoved. Father sent me to study in the Xian Cheng dojo to learn etiquette and to know virtue, not to be a liar for profit. The young man raised his head, proud, clear, and clean. Probably the disdain in her eyes stung He Yuansheng, and He Yuansheng flew into a rage out of humiliation. He Yan fiercely slapped He Yan's face. That was the first time He Yan was hit by He Yuansheng. And her biological father just watched from the side, not saying anything. From the beginning to the end, the only sentence he said was, Big Brother is doing this for your own good. The quarrel between He Yuansheng and He Yan this time alarmed the entire He family. And He Yuansheng was the most powerful person in the He family, so no one doubted his decision. He Yan was locked up in the ancestral hall for a day and a night, and was only released on the second night. During this day and night, no one came to visit her. Whether it was her adoptive parents, or her biological parents. During this day and night, He Yan looked at the big and small memorial tablets in the ancestral hall, and only thought of one question in her heart. What kind of family was the He family? Did she really want to stay in the He family? If the meaning of her existence in this family was to be a substitute, to tie up the interests that didn't belong to them, without any sincerity, then there was really no place for her to stay here. A puppet also wanted to break free from the strings and control her own life. The second night, she returned to her room, and the room was cold and cheerless. He Yan remembered that these days, the Fuyue army was recruiting soldiers on the streets. She sat on the couch, thinking that if someone came to see her tonight and asked her if she was okay, she wouldn't leave. But there was no one. The sound of the night watch came from afar. He Yan carried her bag on her back, and sneaked out the door under the cover of the night. For so many years, ever since she started practicing martial arts, she had been like this, and was already familiar with the way. It was also because the He family didn't value her that she was so relaxed when she left. Forget it, she thought. Although she couldn't continue to stay in the He family, she still saved a little girl from Shuajing. If she wasn't here, how could the He family arrange a marriage? That girl called Song Tao Tao, when she became of marriageable age in the future, she would be able to spend the rest of her life with a suitable young man, and not be implicated in this shameful scheme and become a pawn to be sacrificed. The night was dark, she couldn't see the end of it. The young girl disguised as a young man didn't know what the road ahead was. She turned back to look at the He family's door. The courtyard was hidden in the night, and connected with the past. She steeled her heart, turned around, and walked straight ahead, never looking back. The past laid out in front of her eyes, as if the dust covering it was blown away. It gradually became clear as if it had just happened yesterday. Only He Yan knew that it was a past life that she couldn't go back to. At that time, she was young and impetuous, angry at the absurdity of the He Yuansheng brothers' decision, and didn't seriously think about it. She was a woman. If she really married the Song's second miss, sooner or later, this secret would be exposed. How could the He family allow this to happen? Unless, they already knew that this kind of thing would never happen. He Yen stared at the scented sachet hanging on the bed curtain. He Yuansheng and He Yuanliang knew a long time ago that sooner or later, He Rufei would return. He Yen didn't know He Rufei's situation, but presumably, He Yuansheng already knew at that time. He Rufei's body was gradually getting better, and wasn't on the verge of death like they said. It was because they knew He Rufei would return sooner or later. He Yen and He Rufei would return to their original positions. That was why they talked about the engagement without any scruples. They must have already made up their minds. Before He Rufei got married, He Yen would take off the man's clothes and return to being the He family's young miss. At that time, He Yen didn't realize this. She thought that she would be He Rufei for a long time, perhaps sacrificing her entire life. She didn't expect that one day, she would return to being herself. But this wasn't a blessing. After being someone's substitute for a long time, it was inevitable that she would forget who she was. Moreover, that day, she left the He family with a bag and joined the Fuyue army. From that day on, she had already disrupted the He family's plans, and the chess game was already out of control. Who would have thought? Who would have thought that after living for a lifetime, dying once, and waking up again, after going around in circles, she would actually meet the girl who was almost engaged to her in her previous life here. The 11-year-old girl had already grown into a graceful lady. The young man who left home with a bag had already tasted all the flavors of the world. Fate was mysterious. If it wasn't for Song Taotao, she wouldn't have left home, she wouldn't have joined the army, and she wouldn't have become General Feihong, He Yen today. In the darkness, He Yen smiled silently. Fate let them meet here. Maybe it was to tell her one thing. She didn't do anything wrong. She saved a girl. The next morning, when He Yen woke up, Fei Nu was no longer in the room. Last night, she thought about things until late into the night, so she fell into a deep sleep. She didn't even know when Fei Nu left. When she woke up, she went to freshen up before leaving the room. She wanted to knock on the door next door to see if Xiao Ju was there. However, as soon as she knocked, the door next door opened, and Song Taotao's head popped out from behind the door. She said, "Are you looking for second young master Xiao? They're having breakfast downstairs." They didn't even call her for breakfast. He Yen thought to himself, they really didn't treat her as one of their own. He Yen asked, "Have you eaten? Let's go downstairs and eat together." Song Taotao nodded. The young girl went downstairs with her, and sure enough, she saw Xiao Ju and Fei Nu sitting by the window downstairs. There were some small dishes on the table. He Yen didn't know if it was because he was shocked by Xiao Ju's identity last night, but the innkeeper made the breakfast especially exquisite. He Yen wanted to scold the innkeeper for being extravagant. "Uncle, why didn't you call me for breakfast?" He Yen muttered. "It's fine if you didn't call me, but why didn't you call Miss Song?" "I wanted to sleep more. It has nothing to do with second young master Xiao," Song Taotao hurriedly said. He didn't know why, but she seemed to be a little afraid of Xiao Ju. However, when he thought about it, Xiao Ju was always sarcastic. How could a delicate young girl like her stand it? He Yen picked up a single basket golden cake and stuffed it into his mouth. The cake was fragrant and sweet. It was fresh out of the steamer, so it was piping hot and very appetizing. She smiled and said, "Uncle, what are we doing today?" Xiao Ju looked at her with a faint smile. "What do you want to do?" Before He Yen could finish her words, Song Taotao interrupted her. "Cheng. Young Master Cheng." She already knew that He Yen wasn't Cheng Li Su, but she could also see that He Yen was pretending to be Cheng Li Su, so she didn't expose him. She called out Cheng Li Su's name and said, "Can you go out with me?" After she said this, the other three people at the table looked at Song Taotao. I don't have any clothes. I'm really not used to wearing men's clothes. I want to go out and buy some ready-made clothes to change into, but I don't remember the way." Young Master Cheng, can you go out with me to buy something? She gathered her courage and finished in one breath. Of the three people at the table, Fei Nu didn't say a word the entire night, and Xiao Ju didn't look like the kind of person who would accompany a young lady to buy things. Only He Yan was kind and gentle. He Yan said, "Of course. It's just that." She looked at Xiao Ju. "Uncle, do we have anything to do today?" "Nothing." Xiao Ju lowered his eyes and said lightly, "You can go with second Miss Song." "Thank you, second young Master Xiao." Song Tao Tao was overjoyed. After dinner, He Yan went out with Song Tao Tao. After the two of them left, Fei Nu said, "Young master, I'll go and follow them now. Don't get too close." Xiao Ju ordered, "He still has Song Tao Tao with him." Fei Nu complied and was about to leave when he suddenly thought of something. He hesitated and said, "Young master, are we just going to let Sun Ling's matter go?" "Who said so?" Xiao Ju curled his lips. "Let's wait a little longer. It's not the right time yet." He Yan followed Song Tao Tao out of the inn. After leaving second young Master Xiao, Song Tao Tao became more cheerful. She leaned closer to He Yan and whispered, "Why did you call second young Master Xiao uncle? Why did you call yourself Qingli Su?" "It's a long story. Young Master Cheng has something to do and can't come to Liangzhou for the time being, so I came in his place. Don't tell anyone else about this." Song Tao Tao said, "Of course I won't tell anyone. That good-for-nothing must have asked you to come in his place because he can't do it himself, right? This kind of person wants to be my husband. Why doesn't he just dream about it?" Second Miss Song's prejudice against Cheng Li Su was indeed very deep. "Then what's your name?" Song Tao Tao asked. "I can't tell you now, in case I accidentally spill the beans. I'll tell you when I'm done with my business in the city." He Yan smiled. Song Tao Tao pursed her lips, not very happy. He Yan pointed at a clothing store. "Look, there are clothes over there. Do you want to go in and pick some?" Song Tao Tao changed her mind. He Yan sighed in relief. However, before he could relax for long, he suddenly thought of something and cursed inwardly. When He Yan came out of the Liangzhou guard, Cheng Li Su gave her clothes, hairpins, and jewelry, but forgot to give her money. He Yan didn't dare to ask Xiao Ju for money, so she only had the silver ingot from the flag contest. She couldn't bear to use it. She would rather pull the buttons on Cheng Li Su's clothes in exchange for tea than use it. Song Tao Tao had just come out of the Wanhua pavilion, so her traveling expenses had already been plundered clean. How could she have any money left? She was afraid that whatever she bought today, He Yan would have to pay for it. This was all she had now. Fortunately, Liangzhou city wasn't the capital. There weren't tailors that could sell clothes for tens or hundreds of taels of silver. The clothes here were considered cheap, so He Yan could afford them. Song Tao Tao picked a piece of clothing, as well as a pair of shoes, a hairpin, and a pair of earrings. He Yan had no choice but to pay, so he only had a single copper coin left to pay. After Song Tao Tao picked out the clothes, she changed inside before coming out. The moment he came out, the originally delicate young master turned into a delicate little girl in an instant. She picked out a cherry red dress and tied her long hair into two flat buns with a cherry red hairband. She had bright eyes and white teeth, looking extremely cute. He Yan's eyes lit up when he saw her. In an instant, the heartache of spending money disappeared in front of the cute little girl. "It's really beautiful," she praised sincerely. Song Tao Tao's face turned red. She turned her head and muttered, "The clothes here are too shabby. There aren't any good clothes. Even the clothes made by the Song Estate's tailors are much nicer than this." He Yan thought to himself, how could this be called shabby? She had already spent half a year's worth of savings on this. Song Tao Tao wrapped up the original clothes in a cloth bag and walked out of the clothing store. "Let's go shopping somewhere else," He Yan replied. Okay. A little girl's beauty and cuteness also cost money, especially a little girl who grew up in a wealthy family. He Yan only hoped that there wouldn't be anything else in Liangzhou that would attract second Miss Song's attention. She already had no money. God seemed to have heard her thoughts. Song Tao Tao didn't want to buy anything else along the way. However, she was still in high spirits when she strolled around Liangzhou city. He Yan kept her company with all his heart and didn't seem bored at all. In the end, this arrogant little girl felt a little embarrassed. She asked He Yan, "You've been walking with me for so long. Was it boring?" "No," He Yan said with a smile, "I just wanted to walk around." Song Tao Tao looked at him for a while and said, "You're really a good person." He Yan was a little surprised. When she said that, the little girl had already continued walking. He thought for a while and shook his head with a smile. He Yan didn't just feel like taking care of Song Tao Tao. He also felt like he was doting on her like an elder. After all, this little girl almost became his fiancée. He was also the person who she didn't hesitate to run away from home to fulfill. In a way, he changed her fate. In the years after that, Song Tao Tao didn't get involved in those strange things and grew up well. He Yan felt very lucky. If she didn't do that back then, perhaps Song Tao Tao wouldn't have married another woman, but the person who got married would have been He Rufei. Was marrying into the He family really a good thing? There was no warmth in this family, only benefits. It really wasn't suitable for a little girl like Song Tao Tao. However, He Yan felt a little helpless as he looked at the little girl's bouncing figure. When she left home, it could be considered as running away from marriage. Now, Qing Lisu was also running away from marriage. Song Tao Tao was also running away from marriage. Was this the same as running away from marriage? She had to have a good talk with Qing Lisu. The Sun residence in Liangzhou city was in a miserable state. Sun Ling was sent back to the Sun residence last night. Sun Xiangfu invited famous doctors to treat Sun Ling's injuries overnight. Although they were all superficial injuries, they weren't light. He had to recuperate for a few months. Since young, when had young Master Sun suffered such a big loss? Sun Xiangfu was also in a bad mood. Early this morning, he punished several servants for their mistakes. The servants didn't dare to make a single mistake. The residence was quiet. Sun Ling was lying on the bed. Mrs. Sun sat by the bed and wiped her tears. She scolded fiercely, "Your father is too much. He's just a general. How could he beat you up like this? My son has suffered. I don't know how long it will take for him to recover." Sun Xiangfu heard this as soon as he came in. He said angrily, "What a woman! What do you mean by, just a general? Do you know that he even dared to kill the eldest son of the Minister of Revenue? The Minister of Revenue even reported it to the Emperor. What happened in the end?" In the end, he could only admit that he was unlucky. If he had killed this unfilial son last night, what do you think you could have done? You couldn't have done anything. Mrs. Sun was stunned by the scolding. After a while, she said in a panic, He's really that powerful? Then what should we do now? Should we apologize to him? You can leave." Sun Xiangfu was annoyed. He waved his hand. "I will arrange this. I came to ask Ling, a few things." Mrs. Sun left with tears in her eyes. Sun Xiangfu walked to Sun Ling's side. Looking at Sun Ling's pale face, he was distressed and angry. He said, "Of all the people you could provoke, you had to provoke that king of hell." "I didn't provoke him. It was his nephew who went too far." When Sun Ling mentioned this, he was angry. He told him everything that happened last night. In the end, he said, "How did I know that Qing Lisu would suddenly attack? Was that servant girl the one you liked?" Sun Xiangfu asked. Sun Ling shook his head. "I don't know. Before I could see her face clearly, that person surnamed Xiao arrived. If it was just a misunderstanding, it would be fine. If it was really this girl, since Qing Lisu protected him, it was inevitable that he would be prejudiced against you. Sun Xiangfu sighed. It's my fault. I didn't tell you that Xiao Ju was coming to the city. Otherwise, things wouldn't have turned out this way. Sun Ling never cared about politics. He only knew how to eat, drink, and gamble. Therefore, he didn't know that Sun Xiangfu had sent an invitation to Xiao Ju. Father, we have already offended them. They won't make trouble for us in the future, right? Sun Ling was a little anxious. He was used to being lawless in Liangzhou City. He only relied on his father, the county magistrate. But last night, when Sun Xiangfu cried in front of Xiao Ju, Sun Ling understood that Xiao Ju was not someone the Sun family could afford to offend. Don't be afraid, Sun Xiangfu said. In a few days, Censor Yuan will arrive. Censor Yuan is Prime Minister Su's man. Prime Minister Su and Xiao Ju have always been at odds. Perhaps, we can do something about it. Chapter 93. He Yan accompanied Song Tao Tao until evening before heading back to the inn. There was a stall selling tanghulu along the way. The tanghulu on the straw figurine looked sweet. He Yan took out the last few copper coins he had and bought a few skewers. He took the biggest one and gave it to Song Tao Tao. Are you hungry? Eat some of this to fill your stomach. When we get back to the inn, we'll eat something good. God had mercy on her. Along the way, she had been thinking about what to do if Song Tao Tao wanted to eat at a restaurant and she didn't have enough money. Fortunately, she ate too much in the morning and the little girl was picky, so she didn't want to eat anything along the way. She just sat down and drank a few cups of tea, ate 2 pieces of cake, and spent a few copper coins. Song Tao Tao took the tanghulu and looked at He Yan. Thank you for your hard work today. She paused and said, actually, there isn't much to see in Liangzhou City. The things are ordinary. If it wasn't to hide from second young Master Xiao, I wouldn't have let you accompany me until so late. Huh. He Yan also took a stick of candied haws and put one in his mouth. The hawthorn was sour and astringent, and the honey was sweet and sour together, making him salivate. He Yan lamented that he hadn't eaten such childish things in a long time. He asked, what's wrong? Don't you like Military Governor Xiao? It's not that I don't like him, it's just. I'm a little scared. The little girl pursed her lips. It seems that in front of him, everyone will feel inferior. He Yan was amused. Inferior? Song Tao Tao was like this because she was too young. He Yan smiled. But he's handsome and powerful. Don't all little girls like him? When he was young, there were many girls who secretly came to see Xiao Ju. He Yan had never seen a girl who didn't like him. Song Tao Tao's behavior was already very special. I'm different from them. Song Tao Tao snorted. They only know how to look at appearances. But such a cold person who doesn't know how to speak sweet words will make their lives miserable. I don't like this kind of man. I like a gentleman. She sighed and said regretfully, young Master Xiao is very good like that. It's a pity that he already has a wife. He Yan almost choked on the hawthorn in his mouth. What? Xiao Ju wanted to be his niece-in-law's uncle, but he didn't know that she wanted to be his sister-in-law. Song Tao Tao was indeed someone who had almost become her little fiancé. She actually had such a different view of people. He Yan said, actually, Military Governor Xiao is quite gentle sometimes, but it's rare to see someone like you who doesn't like him. Her heart skipped a beat. She wanted to get something out of Song Tao Tao, so she asked, do you know General Fei Hong, who is now as famous as him? Have you seen him before? General Fei Hong? Song Tao Tao said, are you talking about He family's eldest young master? The one who said that he couldn't see anyone because of the injury on his face and that he wore a mask all day long? He Yan, it's rare for him to wear a mask every day for 10 years. I saw him before I ran away from the marriage. At that time, he had already taken off his mask. He looked all right. Do you know why he wore a mask? Song Tao Tao asked. He Yen, why? Naturally, it was to find a gimmick for himself. Think about it. He didn't take off his mask earlier or later. He took it off right before His Majesty conferred him the title. He said that he had the help of a godly doctor to heal the scar on his face, but how could there be a godly doctor who couldn't even see the scar? After so many years, everyone knew that he family's eldest young master was ugly and terrifying. When he suddenly took off his mask, he turned out to be an elegant young master. This was so bizarre. So, his original 5 points of appearance became 7 points. He Yen couldn't help but applaud Song Tao Tao in his heart. What she said made sense. If she wasn't the one who wore the mask, he would almost believe that Song Tao Tao was telling the truth. Then what do you think of General Fei Hong compared to Military Governor Xiao? Song Tao Tao answered without thinking, of course it's second young master Xiao. That he family's eldest young master isn't as good-looking as second young master Xiao. Fine, in this world, people still judged people by their appearance. He Yen said in surprise, I've never seen General Fei Hong before. I have the same surname as him. I've always wanted to see him with my own eyes. I wonder if I have the chance in this lifetime. Of course you have the chance. However, he family's eldest young master is now very valued by His Majesty. Before I left the capital, His Majesty often summoned him to the palace. Previously, when his cousin passed away, he family's eldest young master didn't attend court for a few days. His Majesty even gave him a lot of things. He Yan's smile was a bit forced. Are you talking about Su family's eldest young mistress? Did she marry someone with the surname Su? I'm not too sure either. I don't know what her name is. This older sister wasn't in the capital before. There were very few people in the capital who knew her, and she didn't have any close sisters. I only know that she was General Fei Hong's younger sister. After being married for a year, she contracted a strange disease and became blind. After she became blind, she wandered around the manor by herself. The servants didn't notice and she fell into the pond and drowned. Song Tao Tao sighed, how pitiful. She clearly had General Fei Hong as her backing. How could she have lived a bad life? I can only say that she had a hard life. What was her name again? He something. I really don't remember. He Yen thought to himself, she was called He Yen. Unfortunately, this name was destined to be buried under General Fei Hong's name. The only people who knew of her was the young mistress of the He family, General Fei Hong's younger sister, who was born with a weak body and was sent to a farmstead to be raised. No one remembered her name. Then what about eldest young Master Su? He Yen asked, after Su family's eldest young mistress died, what happened to him? I usually don't like to hear about these things when I'm in the manor. I vaguely remember my sisters mentioning that Miss He's husband was very depressed for a period of time after the death of the young mistress of the He family. The truth was that he was deeply in love. But this kind of thing, who knows? Song Tao Tao had a kind of insight that surpassed her age in this kind of matter. She said, when can a man's words be taken seriously? Who knows, he might still be reminiscing today and welcoming a new person into the manor tomorrow. He Yen smiled bitterly, what you said makes a lot of sense. Why are you suddenly asking me these things? Song Tao Tao said, but I really don't know much. If you really want to know, you should ask second young Master Xiao. They are both military generals and colleagues. They should know more than me. He Yen thought, wasn't that because she was afraid that Xiao Ju would suspect her? Right now, she already didn't regard her as one of their own. If she continued to ask about the He family, Xiao Ju would probably dig up everything about her. If her identity as a woman was exposed before she even found out anything, she wouldn't even be able to stay in the military camp. Then, the gains wouldn't make up for the losses. As they spoke, they had already reached the entrance of the inn. He Yan and Song Tao Tao went upstairs. Song Tao Tao said, "Thank you so much for today. I will go in and change my clothes and rest for a while. Later, accompany me to eat something." He Yan smiled and said, "Okay." Although this young lady had the habits of a young mistress and liked to order people around, he didn't dislike her. After she left, He Yan didn't return to his room. Instead, he knocked on the door next door. Today was very good. Someone in the room answered, "Come in." As soon as He Yan entered, he saw Xiao Ju sitting at the table. She was using a white handkerchief to wipe the guqin in front of her. He Yan took a closer look and saw that it was the guqin that she had crushed. "Commander-in-Chief, is the guqin fixed? It's not broken, right?" He Yan leaned over and asked in a low voice. Xiao Ju lazily said, "What's the matter?" She completely didn't want to talk to him. He Yan took out his hands from behind his back and said, "Look. I brought you a gift today. Although I accompanied Miss Song to buy things, I still miss you in my heart. This tanghulu is for you." Xiao Ju glanced at the tanghulu in her hands and said, "Take it away." She was so unreasonable. He Yan said, "Don't. I have already tasted it. It's very sweet. I don't eat sweets," he said indifferently. He Yan looked at him and cursed in his heart. What was he pretending for? When they were together at the Xiancheng restaurant, this person carried a small sachet with him. At that time, the young man who was close to him tried to snatch it, and he protected it tightly. He Yan thought that it was some kind of treasure. In the end, he found out that it was just a bag of osmanthus candy. He went home 2 days a month. When he came back to the Xiancheng restaurant again, the sachet was full again. A person who always carried osmanthus candy with him when he was young was now telling her that he didn't eat sweets. Did this person dislike the fact that it was bought with 2 copper coins? "If you don't eat it, you can give it to Fei Nu." He Yan put the tanghulu into the pen holder on the table. He changed the topic and his expression softened. He smiled and said flatteringly, "Governor, I still have something to discuss with you." Xiao Ju looked at him with a calm gaze. He Yan continued to say shamelessly, "I accompanied Miss Song out today. Miss Song wanted to buy clothes and jewelry. She has already spent all the money she got from fighting for the flag. I thought that since Miss Song is your niece-in-law, she is your relative. Although I shouldn't spend the money to buy things for your relative, I am sincere to the governor. How can I let the governor spend money? It's just that I don't have any money now. If Miss Song wants to buy something, can you give me some money? If I don't have money to buy things, I don't want to embarrass you, right? Uncle? Uncle?" The young man's smile was particularly flattering. His eyes flashed with intelligence, like a fox cub that he had hunted when he was young. He could bite people, but when he asked for food, he pretended to be obedient and docile. Xiao Ju looked at him coldly, unmoved. He Yan asked, "Can you do it?" The man's reply was very heartless, "No." "Really?" She was still unwilling to give up. "No." He Yan straightened up and stared at him with hatred. In her previous life, when she joined the army, she had heard people say that a person's true growth began from borrowing money. He Yan now understood. She was already so humble. Xiao Ju was so rich, but he didn't give her any money. He was deliberately targeting her. Xiao Ju raised his head with a calm expression and mocked, "I still remember that I'm not your uncle. Did you forget that Song Tao Tao is Qing Li Su's fiancé, not yours?" He Yan thought for a while before she understood. She said, "You don't think that I and Miss Song?" Xiao Ju lowered his eyes and continued to wipe the zither. "I hope you still remember who you are." He Yan almost cursed out loud in his heart. Look at what he was saying. Was this something a human would say? Was Xiao Ju afraid that she would steal Qing Li Su's fiancé? What a joke. If she hadn't taken the initiative to leave home, how could Qingli Su have this fiancé? Also, Xiaoju wanted to be her uncle. Did he know that she wanted to be his sister-in-law? She didn't want to be his wife, so what did he know? He Yan was angry in her heart. She put on a fake smile and said, "Of course I remember who I am. I'm He Yan who won first place in the Liangzhou Guard competition." She emphasized the word first place and said, "If the commander-in-chief doesn't want to give me money, then forget it." She turned to leave, but suddenly remembered something. She turned around and grabbed the tanghulu on the table. "Since the commander-in-chief doesn't like to eat sweets, I'll take this tanghulu and eat it myself." She took a big bite as if she was venting her anger. As she walked out, she mumbled, "What kind of commander-in-chief is he? He's just a stingy miser." Xiaoju, Fei Nu, who was outside, happened to hear this when he came in. He looked at He Yan's back and closed the door in confusion. Xiaoju looked up at him. "Young master, it's nothing," Xiaoju interrupted him. "Did you get anything today?" Fei Nu shook his head. "He Yan has been accompanying Miss Song. He didn't do anything today. He just strolled around the streets and drank tea. He didn't meet anyone." Xiaoju nodded. "I know. Is it possible that the person he met wasn't from Liangzhou?" Fei Nu asked. "I feel that He Yan is a bit strange. Not to mention his extraordinary skills, he was a new recruit, but he knew how to set up arrays. However, he didn't get caught." It could be seen that his attitude towards Xiaoju was extremely bold. Ordinary people wouldn't be like this, right? He's by my side. I won't make any mistakes. Tell Qi Wu to come here and pick him up. Young master, do you want Qi Wu to accompany Miss Song? Fei Nu asked. Xiaoju nodded. Yuan Baozhen is about to arrive in Liangzhou. It's not suitable for Song Tao Tao to travel with him. There are no good meetings and no good feasts, he said calmly. We have to be fully prepared. Fei Nu replied, I understand. The next few days were very comfortable. Song Tao Tao's hand hadn't fully recovered from the first day of strolling around. She was too lazy to go out these days. Xiaoju and Fei Nu were often absent during the day. He Yan didn't want to leave Song Tao Tao alone at the inn, so he could only accompany her. The little girl was easy to coax. He casually told her about the strange people and strange things he met in the army. She listened very seriously. When she was tired of listening, she casually ate downstairs at the inn. The day passed quickly. He Yan herself really wanted to go out with Xiaoju and the others and ask around for some information, but they didn't bring her along at all. It was obvious that they wanted to exclude her. After a few times, He Yan was also a person who knew her own limits and was too lazy to go forward. This trip to Liangzhou wasn't worth it. His only hope was that Imperial Censor Yuan Baozhen. He Yan had never looked forward to someone's arrival so much. Fortunately, after 3 days, Imperial Censor Yuan finally arrived in Liangzhou City. This morning, Fei Nu brought someone over. This young man was also dressed like a guard. His name was Qi Wu, and he should be Xiaoju's confidant. He came over to take Song Tao Tao away. You can't stay here for the time being. Qi Wu will send you to a safe place. I'll come to pick you up after the matter in Liangzhou is settled, Xiaoju said. Song Tao Tao looked at He Yan, then. Young Master Cheng won't come with me. The others immediately looked at He Yan, especially Xiaoju. Her eyes were extremely cold. He Yan instantly understood the meaning of, you have to deal with your own problems. She could only stand up and smile at Song Tao Tao. I have to do something with second young Master Xiao, so I can't accompany you for now. Don't worry, this Qi Wu will protect you. What is it? Is it dangerous? Song Tao Tao asked again. He Yan was embarrassed, but also touched. He didn't dote on this child for nothing. She even knew to ask if it was dangerous. She smiled. With second young Master Xiao around, it's not dangerous. Don't worry. Then you must be careful. Song Tao Tao warned her, then walked away, looking back every few steps. He Yen turned around and was met with Xiao Ju's mocking gaze. She said, I really didn't do anything. Xiao Ju turned around and left. He Yen hurriedly chased after her, Uncle, don't be angry. Although Miss Song only asked if it was safe for me and not you, it wasn't because she thought you were cold and unapproachable. I'm kind, gentle, and likable. Please don't take it to heart. Shut up. Xiao Ju stopped and looked at her from head to toe. He sneered, if you have time to talk nonsense, why don't you think about how to not be exposed at the banquet? Qing Li Su is still the young master of the UC Naolang's residence. And you, he looked at her meaningfully, can you act like it? After saying this, he left without looking back. He Yen was stunned for a moment before she realized that this person was mocking her again. She shouted at Xiao Ju's back, what's wrong with the UC Naolang? In the end, she was also the young master of the He family. Who wasn't an official? She had pretended to be the young master of a rich family for so many years. What couldn't she pretend to be? Tonight, she must make Xiao Ju look at her in a different light. At the Liangzhou city gate, a carriage stood out among the crowd. This carriage was very luxuriously decorated. Even the outside was embroidered with a large mountain and river painting. There was also a white crane in the grass. The white crane's eyes were made of black crystal. It was very exquisite and interesting. Someone lifted the curtain of the carriage and looked outside. After a while, the curtain was put back down. Yuan Baozhen covered his nose with a handkerchief and said, the wind in this Liangzhou city is really strong. It's much worse than the capital. He was now in his 40s. In fact, he was about the same age as Sun Xiangfu. Compared to Sun Xiangfu, he took good care of himself. His clothes were neat and tidy. His face was white and beardless. When he spoke, there was a hint of a smile. He looked very amiable. Say, Xiao Ju coming to this place, isn't he asking for trouble? He asked the person next to him. Next to him sat a person who looked like a guard. His appearance was mediocre and his body was thin. If it wasn't for the thick calluses between his thumb and index finger, others would think that he was just an ordinary servant. I don't know. The guard replied. Forget it. Since I'm going to see him today, I'll ask him myself. Yuan Baozhen smiled, hey, is the Sun family coming? Sun Xiangfu had personally come to welcome him. A satisfied smile appeared on Yuan Baozhen's face, not bad, not bad. Magistrate Sun is very polite. Sun Xiangfu looked at the carriage that had stopped and wiped the sweat off his forehead. Originally, when the imperial censor came to Liangzhou, although he couldn't neglect him, he didn't need to welcome him at the city gates. However, he had already offended Xiao Ju. If he offended Yuan Baozhen as well, he wouldn't have any chance of survival. He still hoped that Yuan Baozhen would back him up and make Xiao Ju suffer a little. Naturally, he had to use all his efforts to please the person in front of him. When Yuan Baozhen got off the carriage, Sun Xiangfu went up to him and cupped his hands. Lord Yuan, please forgive me for not going out to welcome you. Don't mention it. Yuan Baozhen smiled amiably. I feel that Lord Sun is very friendly. Lord Sun, you don't have to be so polite. The two of them chatted for a while before Sun Xiangfu said, if that's the case, please come to my residence to rest. Yuan Baozhen had come to Liangzhou to temporarily stay at the Sun estate. The two of them then boarded the carriage that Sun Xiangfu had prepared. Inside the carriage, Yuan Baozhen asked, I heard that the Right Army's commander-in-chief has arrived in Liangzhou. Is he in your residence right now? Military Governor Xiao is temporarily staying at an inn in Liangzhou city. He said that he has important matters to attend to. He just arrived tonight. Speaking of which, this official has something that I need Lord Yuan's help with. Yuan Baozhen's eyes flickered, but his smile remained the same as before. He only asked, "Magistrate's son, what is troubling you?" "It's the matter of Military Governor Xiao. My unfilial son accidentally offended Military Governor Zhao's nephew. I'm afraid that Military Governor Xiao will resent me because of this. Since I've prepared a banquet to welcome Lord Yuan, I hope that Lord Yuan can mediate and resolve this misunderstanding." Sun Xiangfu's face was full of shame. Although he didn't say what the matter was, Yuan Baozhen could guess. The son of a county magistrate who could cover the sky with one hand in Liangzhou was naturally not a good person. That Xiao Ju's nephew was the young master of the Right Army's minister Naolang. If the two clashed, the young master's son was destined to suffer. He thought this in his heart, but said, "I think that magistrate's son is overthinking this matter. That military governor Xiao isn't an unreasonable person. Since it was an accident, it's fine to clear things up. Why would he still hold a grudge?" "That's true." Sun Xiangfu wiped his sweat and smiled apologetically, "But military governor Xiao, didn't he deal with Zhao Nua the same way back then?" As soon as he said this, Yuan Baozhen's expression changed. Everyone in Dawei knew that Xiao Ju had beheaded the eldest son of the Minister of Revenue, Zhao Nua, at the Monument Hall. However, too much time had passed, and other people thought that he was young and impetuous, so they gradually forgot. Now that Sun Xiangfu mentioned it, Yuan Baozhen remembered it again. When Zhao Nua was in trouble, the first person that Minister Zhao went to was actually Prime Minister Su. Prime Minister Su handed over the invitation, and Minister Zhao went to the throne room and cried in front of the emperor. The emperor was very sympathetic, but did not punish Xiao Ju. "If the wood is not cut from its roots, it will come back to life. If the water is not cut from its source, it will come back to flow. If the disaster is not cut from its roots, it will come back to chaos." At the time, Prime Minister Su only said this one sentence: "If I don't get rid of this person, he will become a big problem for me in the future." They all wanted to take advantage of the fact that Xiao Ju was still young and hadn't grown up yet to quickly get rid of him. However, ever since he led the southern Manchun soldiers to the southern barbarian lands, he never left anyone with this opportunity. His speed of growth was astonishing. In just a few years, the person who killed Zhao Nua, whom everyone thought was unreasonable, was doing the same thing now. Others would think it was normal. This was the result of Xiao Ju's efforts in these few years. He was much more powerful than Xiao Zhongwu, and much younger. Darren Yuan." Seeing Yuan Baozhen's strange expression in silence, Sun Xiangfu did not understand and asked anxiously. "It's nothing, I just thought of something else." Yuan Baozhen smiled, "Since Military Governor Xiao has come to the banquet tonight, I will speak to him for you. However, I don't know the temperament of Military Governor Xiao. If he does not listen to me, don't blame him." No. Sun Xiangfu was moved to tears. "I am already very happy that Darren Yuan is willing to speak." Yuan Baozhen smiled and shook his head. His thoughts had already flown to other places. No matter how powerful Xiao Ju was, he came to Liangzhou this time to get rid of this big problem for Prime Minister Su. He hoped that everything would go well. In the evening, He Yan was going to go out with Xiao Ju. They were going to Sun Xiangfu's residence, so they had to send Song Tao Tao away. Otherwise, if Sun Ling saw Song Tao Tao, or if Song Tao Tao saw Sun Ling, something might go wrong. Because they were going to the banquet, He Yan deliberately changed into a very Qing Li Su robe. It was a honey-colored robe with a red carp embroidered on the corner. Qing Li Su looked cute and innocent in this robe, but He Yan looked different in it. He looked brighter and more open, but he was still a handsome young man. She picked a hairpin of the same color and stuck it in her hair. She did not forget to pick up the folding fan and held it in front of her chest. When she looked at the person in the bronze mirror, she was very satisfied. After tidying up, He Yan stepped out of the door. As soon as he stepped out, he saw Xiao Ju standing at the door. He had also changed into a different robe. It was a dark blue robe with 2 cranes. He did not wear a golden crown today, only a red sandalwood hairpin was inserted. It looked simple, but if one looked carefully, the material and embroidery were of high quality. He was born exceptionally handsome, and with such attire, he lost some of his aloofness and gained a trace of elegance. He was indeed a noble and elegant young master. He Yen thought that the bright and beautiful young man had finally grown into such a handsome young man. He did not seem to have changed, but at the same time, he seemed to be completely different from before. Xiaoju turned sideways and met He Yan's slightly dazed gaze. He smiled and said, "Wipe your saliva clean." He Yan subconsciously wiped his saliva. He immediately came back to his senses and said, "When? You look like a fool." His words were full of disdain. "You still want to hide it from Yuan Baozhen?" As soon as He Yan heard this, she was not convinced. With a schwa sound, she opened up her folding fan and walked to Xiaoju's side. She smiled faintly and said in a low voice, "With my appearance, if I was in Shuo capital, even if I don't dare to be a governor, I would at least be on par with Qin Gongzi. Otherwise, why would Miss Song only tell me before she left and not you?" The young man's eyes were full of smiles. His eyes were as bright as the stars, but he could not stop his foolishness. Xiaoju mocked, "Because you are stupid." "What? Stupid people always need a lot of reminders." He Yan frowned. "Uncle, do you hate me? This person, would he die if he did not mock him for a day?" "You are my nephew. Why would I hate you?" Xiaoju glanced at him with a smile and ordered Fei Nu, "Let's go." Chapter 94. The Sun Estate was located in the center of the western part of Liangzhou City. It wasn't far from the market square, but it wasn't too noisy. The residences around the estate were large and beautiful. Xiaoju didn't like to travel by carriage, so the two of them rode on horses together. Fei Nu didn't follow them, so they didn't know where he was. He didn't protect second Miss Song like Qi Wu did, nor did he follow Xiaoju to the banquet. He Yan guessed that he was probably helping Xiaoju with something. Without Fei Nu, only He Yan and Xiaoju were left. Normally, Fei Nu was a man of few words, but He Yan would at least exchange a few words with him. Being alone with Xiaoju, He Yan felt inexplicably nervous. Fortunately, they didn't need to talk much as they were riding on horseback. In the time it took to burn 3 sticks of incense, they arrived at the entrance of the Sun Estate. The servant at the entrance of the Sun Estate saw the two of them. He must have been notified by Sun Xiangfu in advance, so he immediately warmly greeted them. "This must be Military Governor Xiao, right? And this is young Master Cheng. Master is already waiting in the front hall." He took Xiaoju and He Yan's horses and ordered another servant, "Yingyu, bring Military Governor Xiao and young Master Cheng inside." The maidservant named Yingyu was also very beautiful. It was already the 9th month, and the autumn nights were already chilly, but she was only wearing a thin gauze dress. If she said she wasn't wearing anything, then she was wearing an extra layer, but if she said she was wearing something, then what could she cover? He Yan almost couldn't control himself and put an outer garment on this girl. The men in their barracks had once said that when they were young, they often fought bare-chested. When they were old, it was inevitable that their legs and waist would hurt. Why bother? Yingyu opened her mouth to speak, her voice as mellow as an oriole's. "Martial Governor, please follow this servant." As she spoke, she looked into Xiaoju's eyes, her eyes filled with tender affection. Although He Yan was a fool, he knew that this servant girl had taken a fancy to Xiaoju. Well, there weren't many girls like Song Tao Tao in this world. Everyone in the world was a normal person. Xiaoju's face was quite scary. There were countless girls who fell in love with him. He Yan should have expected this. Xiaoju didn't even look at the servant girl. Instead, she glanced sideways at He Yan and coldly said, "Why are you in a daze?" "Ah." He Yan came back to his senses. Seeing that he had already walked forward, he hurriedly followed. She thought to herself that this person was really sick. He didn't look at such a beautiful young lady, and instead looked for trouble with her. The two of them followed the maidservant into the Sun estate. The Sun residence was luxuriously renovated. He Yan had seen the residences of the officials in the capital, but they were just so. Although the He family couldn't be compared to the Shao family, they were still considered officials in the capital. The Sun estate was actually comparable to the He families. However, this wasn't the capital, but Liangzhou. Sun Xiangfu wasn't an official in the capital, he was just a county magistrate. 3 years of being a county magistrate, 100,000 snowflakes of silver. These words weren't false. He Yan looked at the mountain rocks, bonsai, and glazed jade tiles. He couldn't help but be amazed. How could a county magistrate afford these things with his salary? Who knew how much money Sun Xiangfu had taken from the people? Also, looking at Sun Ling's conduct, the Sun family's father and son had done a lot of evil in Liangzhou. They were practically half a local tyrant. She thought to herself, but she didn't know that her appearance was also seen by the person beside her. Xiao Ju's eyes moved slightly. The young man was wearing Qing Li Su's clothes, but he wasn't as innocent as Qing Li Su. Although it was said that people rely on clothes and horses rely on saddles, a low-level recruit pretending to be the young master of a large family would definitely give himself away. Things done, people seen, would be engraved into a person's body, becoming clear traces. Everyone's traces were different. He Yan's eyes were filled with emotion and contemplation, but there was no fear or nervousness. If this was his first time doing something like this and going to a place like this kind of reaction wouldn't be justified. At this time, Yingyu stopped and said, "Master, Military Governor Xiao and young Master Cheng have arrived." Immediately, Sun Xiangfu's exaggerated voice sounded from inside, "Military Governor Xiao has arrived." This official was afraid that they wouldn't come. "It's good that they're here, it's good that they're here." He Yan looked up. This person's appearance was filled with fear and trepidation. He didn't have the awe-inspiring aura he had when they first met at the inn a few days ago. Being an official like this, he wasn't afraid of being laughed at. Sun Xiangfu didn't wait for Xiao Ju to speak and turned around to reveal the person behind him. He smiled and said, "Lord Yuan has also arrived." This was Yuan Baozhen. He Yan looked at him. He saw a middle-aged man with a white face and no beard smiling amiably at them. In an instant, this person overlapped with the person in He Yan's memory. The first time she saw Yuan Baozhen, it was outside the He family's study. At that time, He Rufei had already gone to receive his meritorious service, taken off his mask, and truly became General Feihong. And she, as the young miss of the He family's second branch, was waiting for the day she would marry into the Su family. When she saw this person, she was stunned for a moment. She didn't expect He Rufei to make friends in the imperial court so quickly. Later, when she asked He Rufei who that person was, He Rufei said that it was the current imperial censor, Yuan Baozhen. "You're with him, what are you doing?" He Yan had only asked casually at the time. He Rufei looked at her and smiled strangely. He said, "What you need to do now is embroider your wedding dress and not care about these things." He Yan moved closer, his tone was unfathomable. "You have to remember, you are now the young miss of the He family's second branch, a woman." He Yan didn't think much of it. She didn't know how to embroider, and she wasn't the one embroidering the wedding dress. But she understood the meaning of He Rufei's words. He Rufei was warning her not to have any contact with General Feihong. Was he afraid that the truth would be discovered? He Yan sneered in her heart. It was ridiculous that she didn't notice the murderous intent in He Rufei's words at that time. Now that she suddenly met her cousin's friend, how should she get the information she wanted? Before He Yan could think clearly, Yuan Baozhen had already stepped forward. He first cupped his hands in greeting to Xiao Ju. "Governor." Then he looked at He Yan. "This is Qin Gongzi, right?" He Yan stared at him and revealed a surprised smile. "Lord Yuan. I've long heard that Qin Gongzi is young and valiant, with an extraordinary appearance. Now that I've met you, it is indeed true. Yuan Baozhen smiled. Heroes indeed come from the young. He Yan, wasn't Qing Li Su the famous, good-for-nothing Gongzi, in the capital? Fortunately, this person continued to speak. He understood that if he wanted to become an official in Dewei, the first thing he had to do was to learn the ability to speak human language when meeting people, and speak ghost when meeting ghosts. He Yan could only say, "You flatter me, you flatter me." This one is ashamed. As the two of them chatted politely, Sun Xiangfu rubbed his hands and said uneasily, "Governor, this official has a presumptuous request." "Xiao Ju, what is it?" "Didn't my son offend Governor and Qing Gongzi some time ago?" Sun Xiangfu appeared to be very uneasy. Although this official has taught him a lesson, this child feels very guilty and wants to personally apologize to Governor and Qing Gongzi. This official thinks that since he knows that he was wrong, this official will thicken his old face and beg Governor to give this unfilial son a chance to apologize. "Everyone makes mistakes," Yuan Baozhen chimed in from the side. He smiled and said, "Moreover, this is only a misunderstanding. As long as the misunderstanding is resolved, the governor will not take it to heart. Quickly call Sun Xiaoye over and clarify things with Military Governor Xiao." "Really?" Sun Xiangfu excitedly ordered the servant, "Quickly call Sun Xiaoye over." He Yan saw that the two of them were singing the same tune and did not even ask for Xiao Ju's opinion before finishing the show. He knew that the two of them must have discussed this beforehand. This Yuan Baozhen seemed to be the same type of person as Sun Xiangfu. How could someone who could be so close to He Rufei be a kind person? Sun Ling seemed to have been waiting outside the hall. Not long after he finished speaking, he came in with the servant. As soon as he came in, he knelt down in front of Xiao Ju. He Yan almost bit his own tongue. This person used to be arrogant and insufferably arrogant. Now, in just a few days, he looked much more haggard, as if he was seriously ill. He was dressed very simply. He bowed to Xiao Ju and said weakly, "Previously, I was insensible and had an argument with Qing Gongzi. Now, I know that I was wrong. I hope that Governor and Qing Gongzi can forgive me for being young and frivolous. I will definitely turn over a new leaf and never do it again." Was this how young and frivolous was used? Looking at his appearance, he was not young anymore. He Yan did not believe that this person would be able to not do it again in just a few days. She looked at Xiao Ju. Xiao Ju's expression was indifferent. She did not say yes or no. The atmosphere froze for a moment. He Yan still had to mediate. In any case, it was an opera. If they did not continue, wouldn't the banquet be awkward? She smiled and looked at the top of Sun Ling's head. "What are you saying? That day was just a misunderstanding. Young Master Sun, you don't have to take it to heart. Just don't recognize the wrong person in the future. It's fine that you met me and Uncle this time. If you met someone who acted arbitrarily, even if you apologized 100 times, nothing would happen." As soon as he spoke, Sun Xiangfu breathed a sigh of relief. He quickly scolded Sun Ling, "Why aren't you thanking Qing Gongzi? Qing Gongzi is younger than you and much more promising than you." He probably had nothing else to praise, so he said dryly, "Learn more from Qing Gongzi in the future." Sun Ling quickly said a bunch of good things to He Yan. He Yan almost vomited her dinner from last night. She really did not like hearing these words. How could this fake be used to scare people? After finishing this act of, "The county magistrate's young master brings a bramble to ask for punishment," Sun Ling went back to his room. According to his father, Sun Ling was punished when he came home last time. He fell seriously ill and could not get out of bed. Today, he forced himself to come to Xiao Ju to ask for punishment. Now that he had done so, he had to go back to bed. He Yan smiled and said, "Young Master Sun, go quickly. Don't hurt yourself." He was afraid that something bad would happen at the banquet. After all, his son looked like a troublemaker. After Sun Ling left, Sun Xiangfu said, Military Governor Xiao, please take a seat. Young Master Cheng, please take a seat. When the sky turns dark, there will be singing and dancing in the residence. At that time, we can enter the banquet and enjoy the dance. He Yan sat down next to Xiao Ju. After that, it was Sun Xiangfu who did all the talking. There was nothing special about the conversation. It was nothing more than asking He Yan and Xiao Ju if they were used to living in Liangzhou City. The weather in Liangzhou City recently. In the end, it was just some meaningless small talk. He Yan's thoughts were always on Yuan Baozhen. Yuan Baozhen and He Rufei could be considered friends, right? At least, she had seen Yuan Baozhen enter and leave the He residence more than once. Moreover, he did not seem to be acquaintances with He Yuansheng and his son. Then, did He Rufei know that Yuan Baozhen was coming to Liangzhou City this time? He must have known. If they were good friends, perhaps they would bid each other farewell before leaving. Then, Yuan Baozhen should know about the He residence's situation and He Rufei's plans for the next few days. However, how could Yuan Baozhen say so much to her, Qing Lisu? He Yan was lost in her thoughts and forgot to hide her gaze. Yuan Baozhen was not an ordinary person. He glanced around and noticed that He Yan had been staring at him. He did not say anything and continued to listen to Sun Xiangfu's conversation with a smile. Occasionally, he would say a few words. At first glance, he looked very normal. After a while, the sky was completely dark. Sun Xiangfu stood up and said with a smile, I think it's about time. Let's go to the main hall to enjoy the banquet. Of course, there was no objection. Sun Xiangfu walked in the front and led the way. He Yan and Xiao Ju followed behind. Yuan Baozhen was on her right. He Yan thought about He Rufei and could not help but look at Yuan Baozhen. Just as she was thinking about this, Yuan Baozhen suddenly turned his head around. He was an official and was very shrewd. At this moment, he was no longer smiling. His pair of eyes flashed with a frightening light. It was really frightening. He actually caught He Yan red-handed. He Yan was shocked. She had been discovered. Before she could say anything, she felt her arm being gently pulled. The next moment, a person stood in front of her. Xiao Ju's cold voice fell into her ears, watch where you're going. She looked over in surprise. Xiao Ju was taller than her, so Yuan Baozhen's horrifying gaze was completely blocked by him, and he couldn't see anything at all. Xiao Ju also looked at Yuan Baozhen and smiled, Lord Yuan, why do you keep staring at my nephew? Yuan Baozhen was stunned for a moment. Then, he smiled and said, nothing. You probably saw wrong. He turned around and no longer looked at He Yan. It was as if what had just happened was just an insignificant joke. Xiao Ju continued to walk forward. He Yan was stunned for a moment before following her. However, she felt a little strange. Although the words, my nephew, were referring to Qing Lisu, he was protecting her. She had not felt this kind of protection in a long time. Perhaps, she had never felt it before. When they arrived at the main hall, the banquet had already been set up. There were long and short tables in all four directions. He Yan sat down next to Xiao Ju. The empty space in the middle of the main hall was probably for the upcoming singing and dancing. He Yan did not understand. Why would such a banquet invite beautiful women to sing and dance in the middle to liven things up? It should be known that a true master would not bother with such things. However, Sun Xiangfu was not a true master. When he looked at the dishes on the table, He Yan could not help but be speechless. There were auspicious dragons flying in pairs, Buddha's hand golden rolls, phoenix-tailed shark's fin, dried sea cucumber. The banquets held in the residence of a third-rank official in the capital were just like this. It seemed that the Sun family was living a very comfortable life. She turned her head to look at Xiao Ju again. It had to be said that Xiao Ju usually had a cold expression on her face. She could not do this or that. However, When she sat at the banquet and lazily sat down, she lost some of her indifference. The leisurely nature in her bones was all outlined. He Yen suddenly remembered that this person was originally the real young master of the capital. When he was young, he was also like this. Today he went to the banquet, tomorrow he would have a good night banquet. The young master's style was perfect. Thus, when he was at the banquet, he immediately had the shadow of the young master of the Xiao family. Why are you looking at me? Young Master Xiao's lips curled up. His voice was low and fell into He Yan's ears. Be careful not to expose yourself. He Yan coughed lightly. I was shocked by Uncle's grace and was distracted for a moment. She was used to flattering. Xiao Ju was too lazy to pay attention to her when she opened her mouth to speak inexplicable words. At this time, Yuan Baozhen opened his mouth. He said, the relationship between military governor Xiao and young Master Cheng is very good. He's one of us. Of course it's good. Xiao Ju replied indifferently. Yuan Baozhen originally wanted to find a topic to talk about. Of course, he did not care about Xiao Ju's attitude. He picked up the wine cup on the table and smiled. I don't understand. Liangzhou is a bitter and cold place. Military Governor Xiao is much better in the capital than here. Why is he stationed in Liangzhou? When He Yan heard this, her heart moved. She was also curious about this question. Xiao Ju was now the commander-in-chief of the Right Army. The entire Nanfu army was under his control. There was no need for him to bring a new soldier here. He Yan originally thought that he was demoted. However, looking at his arrogant appearance in front of Sun Xiangfu, it did not seem like he was demoted. Xiao Ju looked at Yuan Baozhen. He did not answer his question. Instead, he smiled and asked, what does Imperial Censor Yuan think I am? Why did this person kick the ball back to him again? Yuan Baozhen was also a smart person. The smile on his face did not change. He immediately used the ability that everyone in the bureaucracy had. He said, I think that the commander-in-chief must be worried that the new soldiers will be difficult to lead. Other generals may not be able to lead them well. The commander-in-chief has never been afraid of hardships. That's why he volunteered to be stationed in Liangzhou. After a while, Xiao Ju said, is that so? He asked casually, does Imperial Censor mean that I am here in Liangzhou is a good thing? Of course. Xiao Ju glanced at him and smiled indifferently. I thought that was not what Imperial Censor Yuan wanted to say. Oh. Yuan Baozhen smiled and asked, what does Military Governor Xiao mean by this? Small things are bound to fall. Big things are bound to fail. He said meaningfully. Could it be that Imperial Censor Yuan did not personally come to Liangzhou because of this? The atmosphere immediately froze. Sun Xiangfu did not dare to say a word. He kept his tail between his legs. Yuan Baozhen almost could not maintain his smile. He Yan turned to look at Xiao Ju. He could not help but praise Xiao Ju in his heart. You compliment me, and I compliment you. This kind of talk was really meaningless. It was all a lie. Nothing useful would come out of a banquet at the end. Look at how powerful second young Master Xiao was. One sentence was enough to make others speechless. The hidden secrets of this banquet should have been laid out on the table a long time ago. Yuan Baozhen paused for a moment, then smiled. Military Governor Xiao really knows how to joke. I came to Liangzhou only because I was ordered to patrol. Xiao Ju did not comment. How is the training of the new soldiers at the Commander-in-Chief's guard? Yuan Baozhen asked again. Are there good soldiers and strong formations? Xiao Ju looked at him with a half-smile. This is also one of the tasks of Imperial Censor Yuan's patrol. Although Yuan Baozhen had heard of Xiao Ju's reputation in the past and had met him face to face, this was the first time they sat down and talked. Thus, for the first time, he truly experienced the arrogance of this young killing general. No wonder when he killed Xiao Nua, no matter what he said, it was useless. Just sitting down and talking with this young master was enough to make him physically and mentally exhausted. He could not maintain his usual smile for the first time. He only said, "I'm just concerned. I'm afraid Imperial Censor Yuan is not only concerned about the new soldiers of Liangzhou," Xiao Ju said slowly. "The South Mansion soldiers and the Nine Flags Battalion. Why don't you show some concern as well?" Yuan Baozhen could not respond. Sun Xiangfu looked left and right. Both of them were people he couldn't afford to offend, but he couldn't let a perfectly good banquet be filled with the glint of blades and shadows of swords. So, he nervously came out to mediate. "I say, the two of you must be tired of talking. Why don't you stop and enjoy the song and dance? Eat something. This wine is from Grape Spring, newly brewed. Please have a taste." He then ordered the servant beside him, quickly calling you over. Not long after, several beautiful girls stepped into the hall. The one leading them was the servant who had led He Yan and the others into the hall. At this time, she had changed her clothes. Her red dress was embroidered with plum blossoms, and her sleeves were long. Her makeup was done again. Just now, she was just a delicate beauty, but now, she looked at Xiao Ju with a dazzling radiance. Just like before, she was still looking at Xiao Ju with deep affection. There were so many people sitting here. He Yan aside, Yuan Baozhen was an official. Why was this girl staring at Xiao Ju alone? Wasn't her target too obvious? He Yan thought to himself. He looked at Xiao Ju and saw that her eyes were as cold as ice. She was not moved at all. He Yan felt that the way he looked at Fei Nu was gentler than the way he looked at this girl. Was there something wrong with Xiao Ju? For example, did she hate women? While she was thinking this, Ying Yu had already led the other servant girls to bow and said, "We servants have embarrassed ourselves." The girl playing the zither was playing Longing for a Long Lovesickness. The lingering melody, coupled with the beautiful girl, was a beautiful picture. He Yan was a girl. Xiao Ju was not interested in singing and dancing. After being scolded by Xiao Ju, Yuan Baozhen's mind had already flown to other places. The person he was most satisfied with was probably Sun Xiangfu himself. Sun Xiangfu himself was probably very fond of this dancer, but this missing Yu might also be someone who judged people by their appearance. Her long sleeves were always swayed in the direction of Xiao Ju. Her coquettish eyes could melt a person's bones, but they were always aimed at second young master Xiao. He Yan was bored to death. He even counted that Ying Yu had thrown 5 coquettish eyes at Sun Xiangfu, 3 at Yuan Baozhen, 17 at Xiao Ju, and none at him. She was actually at the bottom. What right did she have to look down on others? Coming to a banquet was just coming to a banquet. Why did she have to attack people's confidence like this? He Yan thought to himself. Maybe it wasn't her fault. Who told her to wear the wrong clothes today? This color was too dark. She reached out with her chopsticks and picked up a piece of dessert. This was Sun Xiangfu's family banquet. Sun Xiangfu probably did not have the guts to poison the food. He Yan tasted it and found that it tasted pretty good. After one song, Ying Yu's forehead was covered in sparkling sweat. The sweat of a beauty was even more moving. Her face was red as she bowed to everyone. Good, good, good. Only Sun Xiangfu was watching the dance seriously. He clapped his hands and said, "Wonderful, wonderful. What do you all think?" Xiao Ju naturally did not answer him. Yuan Baozhen also just smiled. He Yan said, "It's really difficult to chase after a group of flowers. Heavenly fragrance and beauty of the country. Little young master also thinks it's good." Sun Xiangfu looked as if he had found a confidant. He said, "Then how about giving Ying Yu to young master Cheng? That would work." He Yan's body stiffened. He waved his hand and said, "No, no, I already have a fiancé. I'm afraid it's not appropriate." "Ah." Sun Xiangfu immediately felt regretful. He said, "That's a pity." Nowadays, when officials attend banquets, it was fashionable to give beauties to the other party at any time. Was there something wrong with his head? He Yan was still in disbelief when he heard Sun Xiangfu say with a smile, "Yu, then you should go and serve military governor Shao." He Yan was speechless. She suspected that Wanhua Pavilion was opened by County Magistrate Sunday, otherwise, why would his tone and demeanor be so similar to that of a brothel keeper? Even if he was a brothel keeper, he should still have a discerning eye. How could an ordinary person not see that Xiao Ju's entire body was filled with rejection? Some people were blind, but their hearts were as clear as a mirror. Some people were still able to see, but they were already blind. Fortunately, Miss Yu knew her limits. She did not do anything stupid like touching Xiao Ju's hand. She only stood beside him and served him food. There was also a maidservant beside He Yan, who was serving her food. She raised her head and saw Yuan Baozhen sitting opposite her. The person serving the food behind him was not a maidservant, but a person who looked like an imperial bodyguard. Strange, could it be that he was the one who hated women? He Yan looked at the imperial bodyguard behind him. Originally, he was bored to death, but at first glance, he felt as if his blood was about to freeze. His entire body froze on the spot. The imperial bodyguard was not very tall. In fact, among the imperial bodyguards, he could be considered thin and short. His facial features were also extremely mediocre. When he hid behind Yuan Baozhen, he was almost hidden in the darkness, making it difficult for people to notice him. He had been silent all this time. He Yan did not notice him from the moment she saw Yuan Baozhen. Now that she saw him, she felt as if she was struck by lightning. In the blink of an eye, all the dishes on the table disappeared, and the scenery flashed back to that day. She was sitting in the Su residence. Her personal servant served her a bowl of medicinal soup. She said that the kitchen specially brewed this soup for her to nourish her body. She only hoped that she could become pregnant with Lin, or as soon as possible, and add a son to the Su family. The scenery was just right. The sun was shining brightly. She sat at the table and looked out of the window. She saw a manservant pass by. The servant smiled and explained that the medicinal ingredients used to brew the soup today were sent by this manservant. This was He Rufei's manservant, a member of the He family. He Yan was newly married at that time. Although he was occasionally disappointed because of Su Zhiheng, he did not take it to heart. He still had a trace of warmth towards the He family. She would never have thought that the medicinal ingredients sent to nourish her body were for her eyes. That was the last time she saw sunlight in her previous life. The next day, she had a high fever that did not recede. After that, she went blind. It was only a very short glance, but she had already memorized this person's face. Now, even if he changed into an imperial bodyguard's uniform and followed beside Yuan Baozhen, she could still recognize him at a glance. "Let's drink together." Sun Xiangfu raised his cup and smiled. The sparkling wine was poured into the white jade cup. She saw the man beside her raise the cup to his lips. In an instant, the past flashed before her eyes. He Yan was extremely frightened. He only felt that the previous scene was about to repeat itself. Shocked and angry, he slapped away the wine cup in Xiao Ju's hand. "Don't drink." Chapter 95. Don't drink. Her voice was like a sharp sword, filled with bloodlust, interrupting the joyous atmosphere of the banquet. The unforeseen event happened at this moment. Yu, who was standing beside Xiao Ju, was holding a jug of wine in her hands. She had poured wine into the jug and did not have time to take it back. He Yan's voice fell, as if she had received some kind of signal. A dagger appeared under the jug of wine and without hesitation, stabbed towards Xiao Ju. The young man's expression was calm and did not show any signs of panic. The jade cup in his hand flew out and collided with the dagger in the air, shattering into pieces and stopping the tip of the dagger. In a split second, the wind blew from all directions. The beautiful women who had just finished dancing did not all retreat. They stood to the left and right and immediately rushed towards Xiaoju. This was a carefully planned assassination. "Uncle!" He Yan called out. The young man slammed the table and a long sword appeared in his hand. He was surrounded by more than 10 people and coldly ordered, "Hide further away." Sun Xiangfu was stunned by the sudden turn of events. He was so scared that he covered his head and hid under the table. He did not forget to shout, someone come quickly." He Yan was paying attention to the bodyguard behind Yuan Baozhen. She had thought that since this person was He Rufei's man, there must be a reason for him to follow behind Yuan Baozhen. However, in her anger, she only cared about the wine on the table and did not think that the women around her were assassins. Yuan Baozhen was protected by the bodyguard behind him and retreated a few steps. He looked panicked. The bodyguard did not make a move. Could it be that today's assassins were just a coincidence? He Yan thought in her heart. She looked at Xiaoju who was surrounded and almost exploded in anger. The assassins were all women. Whether it was the women who had just danced or the women who had played the zither, each of them had light bodies. They looked gentle and soft, but their attacks were vicious. Hidden in their sleeves were hidden arrows. With a wave of their sleeves, the hidden weapons flew towards Xiaoju. In such a big banquet, Xiaoju was the only one who could fight against 10 people. No matter if it was He Yan's previous life on the battlefield or this life in the martial arts practice field, he had always been open and aboveboard. When had he ever seen such underhanded methods? For a moment, he was filled with righteous indignation. Seeing the small knife used to cut the roasted venison on the table, he grabbed it and rushed into the crowd. "Uncle, I'll help you." He Yan was halfway through her words when she suddenly remembered that she was Qing Li Su. How could the useless young master of the Shuo capital know martial arts? She was afraid that she would not be able to openly show her martial arts skills. She shouted her heart, she shouted, "Why are these people's sleeves so long? She's, SSSSS, cut, SSSSS. The water sleeves instantly turned into short sleeves. When he used the concealed weapon again, his movements were very obvious. Just like that, He Yan shouted as she circled around the crowd. Her figure was light and graceful, as slippery as a loach. Everyone wanted to catch her, but they couldn't. The young man was screaming and cursing at the same time, making the scene somewhat comical. Xiaoju swung her sword to block the knife of the woman in front of her. She turned her head and glanced at her. He Yan was still shouting, "Help! Murder!" She blocked a dart in front of her and kicked the face of the woman next to her. Xiaoju's mouth twitched. The target of the singing girls was Xiaoju. All their sinister methods and hidden weapons were aimed at Xiaoju. Now that a young man had suddenly appeared, everything was disrupted. Ying Yu's face was ashen. She clenched her fist and said hatefully, "Despicable." She chopped at He Yan's head. He Yan shouted, "Aya," and hid behind Xiaoju. "Uncle, save me." She was shocked. These 10 or so women were all very skilled. It was not something that could be trained overnight. This kind of technique was more like a death squad that was specially trained to kill people. Who did Xiaoju offend? Why would they use such a method to kill him? Among this group of women, Ying Yu was the most skilled. But it was not the most skilled. She had countless hidden weapons. Date seed arrows, plum blossom needles, ame thorns, iron lotus. He Yan did not know how she could store so many hidden weapons in her sleeves. However, Xiaoju did not seem to want to take the man's life. The tip of her sword avoided the vital points. He Yan knew that when he was young, his sword skills were outstanding. Now that they met again, this was the first time he saw him in action. The assassin could not get close. He was injured by the autumn sword and fell to the ground. He pulled Yu's sleeve. Yu was pulled forward. In the next moment, the tip of his sword was pointed at Yu's throat. The young man's voice was low. It was more pleasant than the sound of the zither. It contained an unconcealable murderous intent. Who sent you? Yen could not help but look at the bodyguard behind Yuan Baozhen. The bodyguard was standing in front of Yuan Baozhen. His face, which was hidden in the dark, was now revealed. His expression was also very flustered, as if he didn't expect this to happen and couldn't see any clues. However, Yen saw that his index finger slowly bent into a semicircle. No one would pay attention to a bodyguard at this time. The movement of his finger was extremely small. If Yen had not been paying attention to him, he would have missed it. Her intuition, which had been cultivated for many years, made her subconsciously turn around to look. She saw the manservant, who had been hiding at the door, pouncing towards Xiaoju. Be careful. Xiaoju was pointing at Yu. Yen did not care about anything else. He pushed Xiaoju away. The man who had pounced in front of Xiaoju was stabbed in the throat by Xiaoju. The assassins had always been women. Who would pay attention to this manservant? Moreover, from the very first moment of the incident, this person had been hiding under the short table like any other weak servant. Who would have thought that he would be the last chess piece? What's the matter? Xiaoju frowned and asked her. Yen shook his head. Yu, who was on the ground, suddenly laughed. In the dead silence, her laughter was particularly ear-piercing. Yen turned his head to look. The beauty's lips were bleeding, but her expression was ruthless. Yen took a step forward and asked, Who are you? Why do you want to harm my uncle? Yu looked at Yen with a fierce expression. If you did not come out to mess things up, this would not have happened. You'll never know who my master is. She coughed up more and more blood. The blood that flowed out was an abnormal black color. He looked at the women around her and saw that they were all the same. Yen understood. She was indeed a death warrior. Once the assassination failed, she would commit suicide. Is that so? Xiaoju looked at Yu and suddenly smiled. His eyes were full of ridicule as he said, There are countless people in the world who want to kill me. But there is only one person who is so impatient. I'll accept your master's gift. I hope that your master can accept my gift in return. Yu's expression changed greatly. But she had already taken the poison. In just a moment, her face turned ashen. Like the other 10 women, she died and no longer breathed. Xiaoju stepped over her body and stood in the middle of the hall. He looked at Sun Xiangfu, who was hiding under the low table and trembling in fear. He reprimanded, Magistrate Sun, why don't you explain why the servants in your residence tried to assassinate me during your banquet? Are you deliberately trying to harm me? Sun Xiangfu had long been so scared that his mind was in a mess. When he heard this, he almost cried. Seeing that the assassin was gone, he dared to stand up from the short table and hurriedly explained, Commander-in-Chief, I really didn't know. Even if I had 10 times the courage, I would not dare to harm you. I only brought these singers back to the residence half a month ago. I didn't know they were assassins. Magistrate Yuan, please help me explain. I really don't know what is going on. Yuan Baozhen, who had been silent all this time, also came back to his senses. He patted his chest and said with lingering fear, Magistrate Sun, this is not a matter of whether you know or not. These singers are all people in your residence. If something really happened to Military Governor Xiao today, you will not be able to escape responsibility. I think this matter is not as simple as it seems on the surface. Let's clean up this place first and ask a coroner to see where these people came from and what their identities are. He then looked at Xiaoju. Military Governor Xiao is also frightened. Why don't you clean up first and change to another place? Let Magistrate Sun explain what is going on. I think these singers have come prepared. Xiaoju looked at him with a smile that was not a smile, and said, "Okay." The banquet came to an abrupt end in the middle of the night, but at this moment, no one was in the mood to continue. The hall was a mess. The coroner and bailiffs quickly came over and carried the bodies of the singers away. Yuan Baozhen asked, "Do you want to search their bodies to see if they have any keepsakes? Since they have been in the Sun residence for half a month, the keepsakes should have been hidden well. Why would they leave it on their bodies for people to search? If they really do have it, I'm afraid they are trying to frame someone else." Xiaoju stared at Yuan Baozhen and said lightly, "Magistrate Yuan, don't fall into their trap." Yuan Baozhen's scalp tightened. Xiaoju did not pay attention to him anymore. He turned his head and saw He Yan standing there in a daze. He suddenly remembered that she seemed to have not said anything since just now. Was she frightened? "Why are you standing there in a daze? Let's go," he said to He Yan. As soon as he finished speaking, he felt his sleeve being pulled. "Uncle." The young man raised his head. The smile on his face was gone, and there was a rare trace of nervousness. His gaze was also blank. It fell on his face, as if he was not looking at him. He said, "Just now when the servant rushed over, I pushed you away. He scattered a handful of things on my face. My eyes hurt a little." His voice was small, and it was not as arrogant as before. He was a little flustered. "I think I can't see." The doctors went in one by one and quickly came out. They all looked terrified. Everyone shook their heads and sighed. Xiaoju's face became more and more gloomy. Sun Xiangfu watched from the side with fear. Who would have thought that Xiaoju's nephew, the young man who always followed Xiaoju, would have his eyes injured by an assassin? The doctors could only open his eyelids to take a look. The young man only said that he could not see. There were no godly doctors in Liangzhou city, and all the doctors that could be found were all useless. The powder on the ground had long been blown away by the wind, leaving no trace behind. They did not even know what kind of poison it was, so how could they treat it? Fortunately, only the young man's eyes were injured. The rest of his body was fine. Otherwise, if his life was threatened, the governor would be furious. "Governor." Even when he asked this, his tone was calm. Xiaoju should have said, "Yes," but at this moment, he actually could not say it. This young man with extraordinary skills was at the prime of his life. With his talent, he would definitely be promoted in a few years in the Liangzhou city guards. A pearl in a puddle of muddy water would not be buried no matter what. However, losing a pair of eyes was a different situation. Not to mention the impact it would have on the future, it would take courage for him to get used to these dark days. After all, it was not as if he could not see from the moment he was born. Having something and then losing it was much more unbearable than not having it in the first place. "Uncle, you're not sad for me, are you?" He Yan suddenly asked. Although his eyes were covered by a piece of cloth, the tone in which she said this made one imagine that if it were any other time, her eyes would be wide open and filled with mischief and ridicule. "Maybe you're still blaming yourself." She smiled and said, "Actually, you don't have to blame yourself for me. You should praise me. Maybe if you praise me, I'll think that everything I've done was worth it." "Praise you for what?" Xiaoju said indifferently. "Of course you're praising me for being amazing." The young man's voice was a little surprised, but also a little proud. "If I didn't remind you not to drink just now, this assassination attempt would not have happened. I'm your savior, am I not amazing?" She still had the heart to think about these things at a time like this. Xiaoju was speechless. He did not know whether to say that this young man was careless or that he really did not care. "You don't seem to be sad." Xiaoju said, "You can't see. Maybe you'll never be able to see again." As soon as she said this, the young man's fingers curled up. Although it was very subtle, Xiaoju still caught it. He was afraid, and it was not as easy as he made it seem. God won't be so bad to me, right? He Yan said, I've never done anything bad in my life. Why are you treating me like this? If you really want to treat me like this, then I can't do anything. There are many kinds of blind people. I'm so good, so I'll be the best of them all. Xiao Ju was slightly startled. This sentence sounded strangely familiar, as if he had heard it a long time ago. But uncle, are you going to give up so early? I think you should find me a few more doctors to take a look at me. Maybe I can be cured. Why do you say it as if it's incurable? He asked. Xiao Ju looked at him. Although the young man tried his best to appear normal, he was still a little tired. He said, have a good rest. Then he turned and left. Xiao Ju left the room, and the room returned to its original calm. Because there might be assassins in the house, all the servants in the house were evacuated. Only Fei Nu, one of Xiao Ju's own men, remained in the courtyard. He Yan stretched out his hand, as if he wanted to untie the knot in his head. After a while, he put down his hand and did not continue. She lowered her head and muttered, Ding Yi. Yuan Baozhen's bodyguard, He Rufei's former servant, the person who personally gave her a bowl of poison in her previous life. She heard Yuan Baozhen call his name. His name was Ding Yi. In the study, Sun Xiangfu's face was scrunched up. He was about to cry. The person sitting in front of him was Yuan Baozhen. Yuan Baozhen said, Magistrate Sun, I can't help you with this. Magistrate Yuan, you can't leave me in the lurch. Right now, the only person who can help me is you. Sun Xiangfu said with a sad face, I really don't know what happened to those assassins today. Now that the Commander-in-Chief is angry and young Master Qing can't see, Commander-in-Chief Xiao will definitely vent his anger on this lowly official. I'm just a county magistrate, how can I bear the anger of General Feng Yun? Sun Xiangfu had personally witnessed the close relationship between Xiao Ju and Qing Lisu, this pair of uncle and nephew. When Qing Lisu and Sun Ling got into an argument, Xiao Ju rushed over to protect Qing Lisu. It was truly frightening. At that time, it was just a small argument. Now that Qing Lisu was blind, wouldn't Xiao Ju pay with her life? Sun Xiangfu thought of this and began to tremble. I don't think Military Governor Xiao is such an unreasonable person. Yuan Baozhen comforted. As the two were talking, Xiao Ju arrived. Sun Xiangfu didn't have time to beg Yuan Baozhen. He lifted his robe and knelt in front of Xiao Ju. What is the meaning of this? Xiao Ju looked at him coldly and asked. Governor, I really don't know what is going on right now. I was also tricked by them. Even if I had 100 times the courage, I wouldn't dare to harm you. Sun Xiangfu began to cry out his innocence. Stand up. Xiao Ju glanced at him as if she didn't like his actions. She walked in and sat down on the chair at the head of the table. She looked at him and said, Tell me how you met them. She paused and then added, Those assassins. She believed that he wasn't the mastermind. When Sun Xiangfu noticed this, he was overjoyed. Yuan Baozhen's eyes flashed but he didn't make a sound. Sun Xiangfu hurriedly stood up. He didn't even brush off the dust on his robe and retreated to a lower chair to sit down. In this way, he and Yuan Baozhen sat in a position where Xiao Ju was the leader. Sun Xiangfu wiped the sweat from his forehead and said, Actually, they have only been in the Fu for half a month. At first, there was a new opera troupe in the city. The leader of this opera troupe was an old woman. She brought a group of beautiful girls to the city. She said that there was a drought in the place where they lived and there was no way to survive, so they moved to Liangzhou City. They set up a stage in the east of Liangzhou City and performed 3 times a day. In the beginning, only commoners came to take a look. Not only were these girls beautiful, but they also sang very well. They were very eye-catching, and gradually became famous. Many nobles also came to know about them. After a while, the news reached Sun Ling's ears. Sun Ling had touched all the beautiful girls in Liangzhou city. The night Sun Ling watched the show, he asked someone to buy the group of girls to perform in the fu. The leader of the troupe, the old woman, refused and was injured by Sun Ling's servants. When she was about to be beaten to death, Yingyu stood up and said that she was willing to persuade her sisters to enter the fu. She only hoped that Sun Ling would let their leader go. Sun Ling generously did as he was told. Yingyu really managed to persuade the group of girls. After entering the fu, they were very gentle. After entering the Sun Fu, Sun Ling found that this group of girls not only knew how to sing, but were also proficient in the four arts. Among them, Yingyu was the most outstanding. Sun Xiangfu also knew about Yingyu. Sun Xiangfu was different from Sun Ling. Sun Ling only knew how to eat, drink, and play, but Sun Xiangfu was a bit ambitious. Being the county magistrate of Liangzhou city was good, but what if he could go further? Even if he didn't take another step forward, the position of county magistrate wasn't really stable. He had to bribe people from top to bottom. He had to maintain good relations with both familiar and unfamiliar people. For example, he wasn't very familiar with the new commander of the Liang province guards. Sun Xiangfu asked Yingyu to come. He had Yingyu hold a banquet in the fu to liven things up for the guests. In any case, there were two guests, Imperial Censor Yuan Baozhen and Right Army Commander Xiao Zhu. As long as he got on the good side of one of them, he could rest easy. Although Sun Ling was a bit dissatisfied, there was nothing he could do. In the days that followed, Yingyu seriously brought her sisters to practice dancing and singing. Every time Sun Xiangfu went over to watch, he was very satisfied. This servant was also very smart. When she entered the fu for the leader of the troupe, she was a bit unwilling. After experiencing the extravagance of the Sun Fu, she became even more clever. Sometimes, when Sun Xiangfu talked to her, he could feel her desire for power. That's right. People walk to higher places while water flows to lower places. This was the case for everyone, men and women alike. Up until tonight's incident at the banquet, Sun Xiangfu still thought this way. When he talked about these things, probably because he was embarrassed, he added a bit of embellishment. However, without those unimportant embellishments, it was just one thing. Sun Ling was lustful, but who knew that he would pick up a poisonous snake? I really didn't think that they were assassins. Women, how can women be assassins? Sun Xiangfu said. It wasn't clear whether he was saying this to Xiao Zhu or to himself. To the father and son of the Sun family, women had always been playthings, or things that were sent to win the favor of their superiors. Now that he had been played by a woman, it was hard to describe his feelings at the moment. These assassins entered the fu half a month ago? Xiao Zhu asked. Sun Xiangfu nodded, that's right. This is all my fault. I didn't carefully check their identities. I only thought that they were women who had no relatives in the city and were weak and pitiful, so, he tried his best to say that he took pity on their weakness and brought them into the fu, but Xiao Zhu didn't pay any attention to him. She only played with the teacup in her hand and said lightly, half a month ago, Magistrate Sun didn't send me an invitation to the fu. Sun Xiangfu paused. But half a month ago, official Yuan should have known that you would arrive in Liangzhou. He tilted his head and looked at Yuan Baozhen with a half-smile. Hearing this, Yuan Baozhen replied with a smile, what does Governor mean? Are you suspecting me? Governor, why don't you think about it? If I really arranged for these women, how could I be sure that Magistrate Sun would take them back to the fu? I can't predict things like a god. Of course you can't predict things like a god, Xiao Zhu's lips curved slightly and said unhurriedly, you only need to write a letter to Magistrate Sunday. She was saying that Yuan Baozhen and Sun Xiangfu had set this up together. Sun Xiangfu finally thought that he had cleared himself of suspicion, but Xiao Zhu's words immediately made him sweat profusely. He hurriedly waved his hand and said, no, no. Governor, I really didn't. I don't know what's going on. I also didn't receive a letter from official Yuan. Yuan Baozhen also stopped smiling. He looked at Xiao Zhu and said seriously, Governor, with just one sentence, you have convicted me and Magistrate Sun, but you don't even have evidence. It really makes one's heart cold. I don't have any deep enmity with you, and this is the first time I've eaten with you. How could I harm you? He was born with a kind face, and his words were very sincere, but there was also a hint of sadness at being misunderstood. Xiao Zhu stared at him for a while. After a moment, he smiled and said indifferently, it's just a joke. Official Yuan doesn't need to take it seriously. He withdrew his smile and became cold again. He was like a knife that was about to be unsheathed, hiding the fierceness of a mountain storm. However, there are many suspicious points in this matter. Before I figure it out, I'm afraid I'll have to disturb you for a few days, he said. Governor, you're going to live here? After the assassination attempt, normal people would only feel that this place was not safe and would leave as soon as possible to avoid being schemed against again. Why was he still staying here? Yes, the young governor put down his teacup and stood up. He was tall and slender, and his eyes were slightly cold. Live here and catch the thief. You're tuning in to the Blissful Bookshelf YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.